The official Sonic timeline is something that's always been hotly debated within the community. To be fair, it's always been kind of a mess. Sometimes, like in Sonic 06, the timeline wipes itself out. In other instances, like Sonic Generations, it's thrown into complete flux, and then it needs to be restored by running through all the zones you visited with the younger version of yourself who can't speak. And you get the gist, but Sega has finally released the official Sonic timeline. Back in 2022, I talk about this a lot in lore and theory videos, but Sega did hire a lore manager to ensure that the universe is more meaningfully connected. So this is the post-Lore Council lore manager timeline. It's also important to note that the lore manager came out and said, one last note, this is the canon timeline's highlights. Stay tuned for more things to get added in the future. So this is something that is ever changing and can be adjusted as time goes on. So here it goes. We got the prehistory, tens of thousands of years ago. We have tens of thousands of years, question mark. We have thousands of years ago, 2,000 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago, classic Sonic era, modern Sonic era, and even 200 years later. So this is the distant past, the present, the future, and the distant future. This is pretty crazy. The first thing on the list actually is the destruction and regeneration by Dark Gaia and Light Gaia. It says, at some point, Dark Gaia, which grew over millions of years, destroyed the Earth, and Light Gaia healed it, repeating the same history. The timeline even goes on to give an official product description for Sonic World Adventure, aka Sonic Unleashed, which is kind of a curious timing because, you know, they just released a PC comp. But with that being said, let's see what they say about Sonic Unleashed. It says, in Sonic World Adventure, Sonic, the world's fastest hedgehog, challenges Dr. Eggman's gigantic space battleship and transforms into the shining golden supersonic. He corners Dr. Eggman. However, it was a trap. Sonic was captured by a high-energy capture device and had his supersonic powers and the Chaos Emeralds stolen. Dr. Eggman unleashes the 7 Chaos Emeralds' enormous energy onto Earth's surface, splitting it into 7 pieces and revealing the giant monster, Dark Gaia, from the cracks. At the same time, something strange happens to Sonic's body, transforming him into a frightening beast-like figure. With the planet shattered and his appearance completely changed, Sonic embarks on a new adventure across the globe. At the same time, we have the Ancients and the Chaos Emerald. So now we're going into Sonic Frontiers lore. It says, the Ancients take refuge on Earth with the Chaos Emeralds. A small number of their descendants escape to a place called Mystic Ruins and build a temple to the Master Emerald. Over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, the Ancients become the Chao. So we know for a fact that the Ancients are responsible for bringing the Chaos Emeralds to Earth, but also it's interesting to note that they did land on the Mystic Ruins, and that's where the first Master Emerald Shrine was created. The question is, how did it get on Angel Island? As far as I'm aware, the Mystic Ruins is not Angel Island, but I could be wrong. 10,000s of years ago, Dark Gaia's destruction of Earth. So he actually straight up destroyed the Earth. It says the Earth is destroyed by a super energy life form called Dark Gaia that emerged from the core of the star. This event was later recorded in the ancient documents known as the Gaia documents. And then next we go into Sonic Zero Gravity. So it says the ancestor of the Babylonian bandits washed up on Earth. A spaceship from faraway space goes out of control, and the race that is the ancestor of the Babylonian bandits crash lands on Earth. The engine unit of the ship that was separated at the time is scattered around the world and later comes to be called the Ark of the Stars. The exact time is unknown. And now we get into the more interesting stuff. We are talking about thousands of years ago, where we are finally talking about Sonic Adventure and the Echidna tribe. It says the Echidna tribe is destroyed by the wrath of chaos. The Echidna tribe attacks the temple of the Master Emerald to steal it, but their Chao companions, which, you know, technically were the Ancients, are sacrificed, and the Echidna tribe is wiped out by the enraged chaos. It's interesting that the Echidna tribe was wiped out when Knuckles is still existing today, and he's the last of the Echidnas. I don't know how that works, honestly. Maybe they'll explain it later on. But let's move on to the next part. Next, we move into events of Shadow the Hedgehog 2005, or prehistoric events of Shadow 2005, because we now have 2,000 years ago, where it stated that the Black Arms preparations for invasion of Earth has commenced. The Black Arms drop a flying temple on Griffith on Earth. From there, we get into prehistoric events from Sonic Battle. It says Emerald is born in an ancient civilization. Combat robots called Gizoids are created, one of which is later named Emerald. We now move into like this modern present era where we get into 50 years ago, and you already know what's about to happen. Project Shadow, all that good stuff. Next, we have Black Doom and the Dark Pact, which states that Black Doom contacts Professor Gerald and offers up his own DNA in exchange for guidance on how to invade Earth 50 years from now. Shadow is then created from that DNA. Well, this is a little bit off because it could be a mistranslation. The deal was technically something to the effect of like Black Doom will get the Chaos Emeralds in 50 years, but ultimately, yeah, it does kind of mean the same thing. We then move on to the Ark Destruction Incident, which says the ancient combat robots, Gizoid, that were the subject of research within the Ark go out of control, causing extensive damage to the Ark facilities. This is one of the reasons why G.U.N intervenes in Ark. We then move on to one of the sadder and technically more iconic moments of the Sonic franchise in the past of Sonic Adventure 2, which is the G.U.N attack on Ark. Maria is killed in a sudden G.U.N attack. Gerald, who has lost his mind due to his granddaughter's robbery, prepares to take revenge on the the Arc system and Shadow, but is also imprisoned and executed. So yeah, a little bit of a mistranslation, but I'm sure you all know what robbery means. We then move on to Sonic 06, where things definitely get tricky as time travel is involved and parts of the timeline that get wiped out as well, which stems from the Soliana project as well as the creation of Mephiles and Shadow the Hedgehog and Silver going back in time. Sonic and Elise's altered history. So Sonic and Elise go back in time and blow out the Solaris Flame, which are the source of the tragedy. This means that the Solaris experiment never failed, the world is saved from crisis, and the devastated future becomes a peaceful world. However, this series of events also never happened in history, right? Yeah. So it did happen at one point, but it did wipe itself out. But the question is, what is the corrected timeline? We have Solaris experiment failed, Iblis's seal. When King Soliana's Solaris experiment fails, he sacrifices his own life to prevent the flames of calamity from being awakened and destroying the world, sealing Iblis within his daughter, Elise. So it's canon, but it never happened. Not necessarily a shocking revelation if you've been following this stuff as I have closely for many years, but perhaps for some of you it might come as news. Now we get into the good stuff, the origins of Sonic, no pun intended, the classic Sonic era, starting with Sonic 1, where Dr. Eggman attacks South Island. Sonic defeats Dr. Eggman, who attacks South Island to steal the Chaos Emeralds and prevents him from taking over the world. Of course, after that, the Chaos Emeralds are scattered to a different island. And now it's official, Sonic CD officially takes place before Sonic 2, something that's not really surprising. I think that's been conventional wisdom, but it is nonetheless confirmed now. Sonic CD is officially next in the timeline, and it says Sonic rescues Amy, who was kidnapped by Metal Sonic. Amy, who had a fateful encounter with Sonic on Little Planet, became embroiled in Dr. Eggman's evil deeds and was kidnapped by Metal Sonic. Sonic defeats Metal Sonic and rescued Amy, thus thwarting Dr. Eggman's ambitions. We then have the events of Sonic 2, where Tails is bullied for having two tails, but then he meets Sonic, they become best friends, and Sonic is able to show Tails how to truly reach his potential. They link up and Sonic 2 happens, which leads to an eventual showdown between Sonic and Dr. Eggman on the Death Egg, and he's promptly defeated. And after Dr. Eggman is defeated in Sonic 2, the Death Egg officially crashes onto Angel Island, which is exactly what it says here. Death Egg crashes into Angel Island. So this is they kind of just skipped over the events of Sonic 2 and just got to the conclusion. It says Sonic and Tails work together to defeat Dr. Eggman, who attacks West Side Island. Destroyed Space Fortress, the Death Egg crashes into Angel Island. Next, we have the events of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, where it says recover the Master Emerald, prevent the Death Egg Fortress from reviving. Dr. Eggman tricks Knuckles into stealing the Master Emerald and plots to revive the crashed Space Fortress, the Death Egg. However, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles work together to destroy the Death Egg, thwarting Dr. Eggman's ambitions of world domination. The Master Emerald is restored, and Angel Island rises into the sky once again. What's interesting is that there's no mention of the Super Emeralds or Hypersonic or anything like that, so they kind of avoided that question. What actually happened to Hypersonic? Is he canon? Who knows? I think he is, but Sega just wants nothing to do with him going forward. And then we move on to Sonic Mania, which, yes, obviously it happens after Sonic 3, but also it's before Sonic Superstars. We get into the mysterious secret stone, Phantom Ruby. Dr. Eggman unearths a gem with mysterious powers called the Phantom Ruby, which sends Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles to various worlds. After being defeated by Sonic and his friends, the Phantom Ruby leaves Dr. Eggman's hands and disappears across time and space into modern Sonic's world. So Dr. Eggman gets the Phantom Ruby in the past, and then he somehow gets it in the future, and I guess doesn't realize that it was from the past. So you see where time travel just gets a little crazy. Kind of doesn't really make sense, but regardless, we're going to move on to the next part of the story, because now we get into Sonic Forces from classic Sonic's POV. The fateful battle over the Phantom Ruby. So now we get into Sonic Mania Plus. After saving the world with modern Sonic and Sonic Forces, Sonic returns to his original time. He chases after the flying Phantom Ruby and discovers Mighty and Ray, who have been captured. Sonic rescues them, but one of them is a fake. Sonic saves his friend and defeats Dr. Eggman, who once again obtained the Phantom Ruby, and the world peace is once again secured. So let me get this straight. During Sonic Mania, Dr. Eggman Classic gets the Phantom Ruby. It then gets sent into the future, where present Dr. Eggman gets it, and then after Sonic Mania and Sonic Forces takes place, we go into Sonic Mania Plus, where Dr. Eggman gets the Phantom Ruby again. So it's like, it's just bouncing back and forth, but somehow he doesn't know it's in the present. Like I said before, it's a little crazy, but let's move on to the next part of the timeline. And the very last part of the official classic Sonic timeline is Dr. Eggman invades the North Star Islands. Dr. Eggman and the bounty hunter Fang invade the North Star Islands. They overwork and drag Trip, who lives there, around. Sonic and his friends use the Chaos Emerald's new power, Emerald Power, to thwart Eggman and his evil deeds. And now we progress the timeline and officially move on to the modern Sonic era. Let's see if it gets controversial here going forward, because I'm sure things are going to get a little tricky here. We start off with Sonic 4 Episode 1 and Sonic 4 Episode 2. It says, a fierce battle with the resurrected Metal Sonic occurs. Dr. Eggman completely revives Metal Sonic. He launches the Death Egg MK2 into the sky above Little Planet and sets out to conquer the world. However, Sonic once again defeats Metal Sonic in a fierce battle, destroying the Death Egg MK2 and dashing Dr. Eggman's ambitions. So for those of you who have been wondering, the very first official game of the modern Sonic era in terms of the timeline is actually Sonic 4. We then move on to, of course, the first 3D Sonic game, technically, you know, in terms of mainline, Sonic Adventure 1. It says Sonic and his friends save the world from the threat of perfect chaos. It says Dr. Eggman releases Chaos, who was sealed away in the Master Emerald, and tries to use it to take over the world. However, Chaos goes out of control and evolves into perfect chaos, bringing the world to the brink of great destruction. Thanks to Sonic and the will of many people, the Chaos Emeralds, which had lost their power, are restored, and Sonic transforms into Super Sonic. He stops perfect chaos and crushes Dr. Eggman's ambitions. We then move on to Sonic Shuffle, which I guess is officially canon, the crisis of Marginal World, a different world of light and dreams. Lumina, the guardian spirit of Marginal World, summons Sonic and his friends to stop Void from conquering Marginal World. Sonic and Lumina use magic cards to force Jewels to save Marginal World from the brinks of collapse. Next up, we have SA2, Shadow Awakens. Dr. Eggman awakens Shadow and tries to use him to take over the world, but Shadow uses him instead to carry out revenge that was left by Gerald. In the final stage of his revenge, Shadow regains his true memories thanks to Amy. He cooperates with Sonic and saves the world at the cost of his own life. And then we move on to a very interesting part of the timeline, which is the placement of the advance games, which has never really been confirmed. It's only been kind of like speculated. Curiously enough, the list actually leaves off Sonic Advance 1 for whatever reason. So it starts actually with Sonic Advance 2. And by the way, this takes place before Sonic Heroes as well. Cream and Cheese's first adventure. So Sonic meets Cream and saves her with his friends. They rescue Vanilla, who was kidnapped, and defeat Dr. Eggman, who is plotting to build Eggman Land again. So perhaps it could be true that Sonic Advance 1 was either retconned, or 2, nothing that happens in the game is important enough to include in the timeline. Or maybe it could be a mix of both. So regardless, no Sonic Advance 1. Let's move on to what happens next in the Sonic timeline, and that would be Sonic Heroes. Sonic Heroes, it says Rebellion, a masterpiece. Metal Sonic, who has regained his sense of self, rebels and imprisons Dr. Eggman, and in his name issues a challenge to Sonic and his friends to conquer the world. Metal Sonic gathers Sonic and his friends' biodata during the battle and becomes more powerful, but is ultimately defeated by Sonic and his friends. So yeah, ultimately it's a very short description for the plot of Sonic Heroes because it's pretty light. The most significant things that happen are the reemergence of Shadow as well as the introduction of Neo Metal Sonic. After Sonic Heroes, we then move on to Shadow 05. So it says Shadow repels Black Doom's invasion of Earth. Black Doom, an alien invader, invades the Earth. Shadow, provoked by Black Doom to learn about his past, travels the world in search of the Chaos Emeralds, and sometimes at odds with Sonic and the others. After many struggles, Shadow defeats Black Doom, fulfills the wish entrusted to him, and resolves to overcome his past and move forward. Which hero path, dark path, neutral path, like which actual true story happens, that's kind of up for debate, but we know that Shadow the Hedgehog happens directly after Sonic Heroes. Which then brings us to another big shakeup for the timeline, or at least like official confirmation, and that is the placement of Sonic Battle, which takes place after Shadow 05, and I think I'm actually not really upset with this. I think this does make a lot of sense. Considering how deep you go into Shadow's past in this game, it really wouldn't make sense for him to discover all of this in Shadow 05 after the events of this game, so I'm definitely cool with this taking place, but it's good to know that we have the official confirmation as to when it happens. It says Emerald's growth and rampage. Dr. Eggman tries to reboot the ancient weapon Gizoid and uses it to take over the world, but it doesn't work and he discards it. Sonic picks it up, names it Emerald, and raises it. Dr. Eggman tries to use Emerald, who has gained powers as a combat weapon, but ends up causing him to go out of control. There's no way to stop Emerald safely, and Sonic ends up defeating him. Which then brings us to Sonic Advance 3 in the timeline, and I guess the most curious thing about all this is, yes, Sonic Advance 2 is on the canon timeline, Sonic Advance 3 is on the canon timeline, but for some reason Sonic Advance 1 is missing. It says Dr. Eggman used the power of the Chaos Emeralds to split the world into 7 parts. He repeatedly used Gemroll, a combat robot developed based on Emerald, against Sonic and his friends, but was unable to win. And eventually, Gemroll went berserk. Dr. Eggman was defeated. Gemroll was then retrieved and repaired and adjusted by Tails, and began living as a member of the Cream family. Which then takes us into Sonic Rush, and it's also important to note that this does take place before Sonic 06, for those of you who are wondering. I talked about this in a video a couple of years ago, but regardless, it's on the official timeline now. Blaze comes to Sonic's world from another world in pursuit of the stolen Soul Emeralds. Through her interactions with Amy and Cream and fighting alongside Sonic, Blaze begins to trust Sonic and others a little. Sonic and Blaze work together to defeat Dr. Eggman, and Blaze recovers the Soul Emeralds and returns to her own world. One of the things that bothers me about Sonic Rush and Sonic 06 is the fact that Blaze the cat seems like a completely different character in this game as opposed to how she is in Sonic Rush. Another thing that I think is confusing is that, like, okay, so in Sonic Rush, she's from a different dimension. In Sonic 06, she's in the future, just like chilling. Also, when she interacts with Sonic in this game, she acts like she's never seen him before. She's totally cool with Silver killing him. And then also at the end, she like kind of dies. To me, Blaze from 06 and Blaze from Rush always felt different, but now that the canon and the timeline timeline is unified, that is what it is. Let's move on to Sonic 06 because that's next in the timeline. A major incident surrounding the Flame of Calamity begins to unfold. In order to obtain the Flame of Calamity, Dr. Eggman kidnaps Princess Elise, who was sealed away by Iblis. Sonic rushes to rescue her, and Silver, who travels back in time to defeat Sonic in order to save the future. Shadow, who is on a mission to Dr. Eggman's base, and the mysterious being Mephiles all become entangled in a major incident, each with their own intentions and destinies. Calling Sonic 06 a major incident is definitely one way to put it. This brings us directly to Sonic Riders, and it says, battle against the Babylon Bandits and the fastest race in the world. Dr. Eggman is hosting the Extreme Gears World Fastest Competition. Sonic and his friends compete in a heated race against the Babylon Bandits for the prize, the Chaos Emerald. However, the race is a trap set by Dr. Eggman to steal the treasures of the Babylon Temple. We then jump back over to Sonic Rush Adventure, where it says Sonic and Tails are caught in a storm and washed up on Blaze's world. They are rescued by Marine, a self-proclaimed adventurer, and while investigating the islands, they are reunited with Blaze. However, before they can go enjoy their reunion, they are caught up in a national treasure, the Jeweled Staff, being stolen right before their eyes, and they end up chasing the pirates with Blaze. Sonic and friends defeat Dr. Eggman, and they retrieve the Jeweled Staff. From there, we move on to the events of Sonic Riders Zero Gravity, and by the way, I didn't mention this before, but it's cool to know that the Sonic Riders games are canon. Up until Sonic Frontiers, we didn't even know if that was the case. It says Jet's ancestors were capable of warp travel through gravity conversion. That spaceship was the modern Babylon Garden, and the Arc of the Stars was its engine unit. When all 5 Arc of the Stars gathered in the Babylon Garden floating in the sky, the output went out of control, and the Babylon Garden was on the verge of turning into a black hole. Sonic, Jet, and the others were able to avert the worst-case scenario. Which brings us then into Sonic Unleashed. Dark Gaia is forcibly awakened by Dr. Eggman. In order to realize his ambitions, Dr. Eggman took the powers from Super Sonic, split the planet into 7, and forcibly awakened Dark Gaia. Sonic, along with Chip, traveled to the Gaia Temple to restore the powered Chaos Emeralds and the world, regaining his powers and defeating Dark Gaia. We then move on to Sonic Colors, friendship with the alien Wisp. Dr. Eggman takes over the planet where Wisps live and builds the Egg Planet Park. He plans to steal the powerful energy of the alien Wisps who live there and activate a terrible weapon. Sonic and his friends cooperate with the Wisps, and even though they can't communicate with each other and thwart Dr. Eggman's ambitions. So you know what I find really interesting about this? They said Sonic and friends. They didn't say Sonic and Tails, which is what we see in the actual version of Sonic Colors. In Sonic Colors DS, it's a much different story that actually features all of Sonic's friends, so I wonder if that means Colors DS is actually canon as opposed to the HD or whatever, SD version of Sonic Colors, the Wii version. I don't know. I think it could just be a mistranslation, but it's definitely something to keep in the back of your head because that wording does seem a little interesting. We then move on to, of course, Sonic and Shadow Generations. No surprise here that this was included at this point in time in the timeline, but now we're dealing with more time travel stuff, so let's see what they have to say. It says 2 Sonics, past and future. After his defeat at Egg Planet Park, Dr. Eggman finds a Time Eater who can manipulate time and space. He uses its power to summon his past self and begin a plan to rewrite the timeline. Sonic is sucked into the Time Eater, which suddenly appears and wakes up in a world of pure white. He meets a smaller version of himself there, and together they work together to restore the world and his friends, whose life force and color had been sucked out, and defeat the 2 Dr. Eggman and the Time Eater. Simultaneously, at this point in time, they also get into what Shadow was up to during Sonic and Shadow Generations. It says a fleeting moment of darkness and light is resurrected. Taking advantage of the time-space anomaly caused by the Time Eater, Black Doom is resurrected. When he reunites with Shadow in the white space, he provokes him and encourages him to awaken his powers. Meanwhile, Marie and Gerald, who were supposed to have died long ago, are also resurrected. They spend a fleeting, precious time together in the stop time space. In the end, Black Doom attempts to absorb Shadow, who has become the strongest Black Arms warrior, but Shadow's heart has not been consumed by darkness and he refuses. With Maria's wish in his heart, he defeats Black Doom. Which then brings us into Sonic Free Riders, which is definitely canon. Dr. Eggman disguises himself as King Doc of the Tar Egg Kingdom in order to embed the biodata of Sonic and the other racers into Metal Sonic. He holds the World Grand Prix, a global competition for extreme gear where the winner will receive a huge prize of money and treasure. The race begins where the thoughts of each participating team intersect. Which then directly brings us into Sonic Lost World. The 6 demons betray Dr. Eggman. Dr. Eggman finds the Lost Hex, a mystical land where the Oni clan live, and uses the conch cell, which is their weak point, to enslave the 6 demons and absorb life energy from the earth. However, after losing the conch cell, the 6 demons betray Dr. Eggman, banish him, steal the device, and suck out all of the life energy, putting the earth in danger of collapse. Sonic and Dr. Eggman have no choice but to join forces to defeat the 6 demons, and they defeat them. We then get another unique timeline placement, and that is because the release date of this game is different than when it takes place in the timeline. And that, of course, is the now official placement of Team Sonic Racing. King Dodonpaw holds a car race in the Donpaw Kingdom. Dr. Eggman steals the Ultimate Power Engine developed by Dodonpaw of the Donpaw Kingdom and plots to use it for evil purposes. However, just as he is using the engine for evil purposes, he is defeated by Sonic and his friends, and his ambitions are thwarted. Next, we move on to Sonic Forces. Sonic and his avatar team up to free the world that was 99% conquered by Dr. Eggman. Dr. Eggman creates an infinite army with the power of the newly acquired Phantom Ruby. I don't know how it's newly acquired if he acquired it in the past. And with Infinite at his side, he takes over 99% of the world. However, Dr. Eggman and his allies are defeated by the Resistance army formed by Sonic's friends and the Avatar who joined it, modern and classic Sonic, and pieces restored to the world. Which then brings us to Sonic Frontiers. A mysterious girl holds Knuckles captive in cyberspace. That is the entire premise of the plot. While investigating the ancient ruins he discovered on Angel Island, Knuckles is sent to Ares Island. Just as Knuckles thinks that Dr. Eggman is behind it, a mysterious girl appears and traps him in cyberspace. So I actually got a little ahead of myself. This description is actually just for the Knuckles prologue, so it had its own little section. They're actually going to move on to the plot of Frontiers next. It says, Sonic and Sage protect the world from the end. Dr. Eggman attempted to use the technology of the ancients of Starfall Islands and connected to the network, causing a series of incidents. Sage evolved by accessing the ancients' technology and began to interfere with Sonic in order to protect Dr. Eggman, who was trapped in cyberspace. In the process, Sage noticed the unknown potential of Sonic, whose answers could not be found through calculations, and suggested to Dr. Eggman that they fight the true enemy. Together, they defeated the end and saved the world. That is the end of the modern Sonic timeline. We now move to 200 years later, the future world before the change. The world has been devastated by Iblis. Silver and Blaze are fighting an endless battle against Iblis, who keeps resurrecting. With the guidance of Mephiles, a mysterious figure who suddenly appears, the two travel back in time to the era in which Sonic and his friends lived to kill the person who is said to be the Iblis trigger and cause this devastation. Now, the altered future of the world is after Sonic 06, so due to Sonic and Elise's change to history, the calamity of fire no longer exists and the disaster itself has not occurred, leaving the world in a state of peace.
Freeze! What do you think you're doing? Get that hedgehog!
Talk about low-budget flights, no food or movies. I'm out of here. I like running better.
Conspiracy theories come in all shapes and sizes. For example, the Earth is flat. We didn't actually land on the moon. Birds aren't real. The government is actually run by reptilians. And the list goes on and on. But in typical Sonic fan fashion, we have to ask ourselves the question, how can we make this about Sonic? Perhaps it's time to put on our tinfoil hats. And it is time to talk about the original Sonic conspiracy theory that maybe goes a lot deeper than many people think. And there's a lot of reason for this discussion. I've seen a lot of this in my comments recently, and here's why. So in Sonic Adventure 2, the government and the general population mistakes Sonic the Hedgehog for Shadow. And many people have been asking why. And the reason why this even comes up is because of the brand new Sonic Movie 3 trailer. Now, Sonic Movie 3 is going to have a lot of inspiration from Sonic Adventure 2. It's not going to be one-to-one, obviously. We've kind of discussed that at length. But when people are debating about what the plot could potentially be, the biggest plot point of Sonic Adventure 2 that kind of spilled over into the movie 3 discussion is like, people are wondering, how could anyone mistake Sonic for Shadow? They're so different. The amount of Sonic fans I've heard over the years talk about how the plot point that people mistook Sonic for Shadow is really dumb is mind-blowing to me. I don't understand how people could get confused on this or how they think that this is stupid. It makes so much sense within the context of Sonic Adventure 2 that people mistook Sonic for Shadow. And that's what really got my head turning. And this conspiracy goes a lot deeper than many people might imagine. So let's talk about how this could happen, why it's obvious that this could have happened, and why it's not so far-fetched that people mistake Sonic for Shadow despite their differences. So how is Sonic the Hedgehog blamed for the crimes of a similar looking hedgehog? Or to some people, not similar at all. Allegedly, these two look nothing alike. Let's use the real life argument. Let's talk about how this could happen in real life without really using any in-game context or lore. It will get a lot more exciting when we get into that, but let's just talk about why this isn't even far-fetched to begin with. For example, let's talk about maybe your uncle. By the way, this guy right here is your uncle. Or maybe even your normie dad. So within the context of that, Sonic the Hedgehog is a very iconic and recognizable character. Do you think your father, who probably has a zero idea or understanding about the Sonic franchise, could potentially get this character right here, Shadow, mixed up with Sonic? Seems pretty likely to me. And by the way, you are a Sonic fan. You know everything about the Sonic franchise. You probably spend all day on Twitter micro-analyzing and debating every single thing about Sonic. Obviously, to you, it might seem far-fetched that Sonic could be mistaken for Shadow. But you don't think for a second that this guy right here might not know who Shadow is? Might think that it's just Sonic because they look similar? I mean, let's be real. I bet if some of you asked your parents who this character right here is, I would not be surprised for a second if they said that Tails was like Pikachu or something like that. Go ahead, go try and ask him and see what they say. If my memory serves correctly, during the Sonic Movie 2 reviews, I'm pretty sure one of the reviews was asking why there's so many Sonic characters and why is there a red Sonic when referring to Knuckles. So is it really that far-fetched to assume that someone would think that Shadow is just Sonic, especially when they don't know as much as we do? Probably not. All right, now that we've gotten that part out of the way, let's get into the exciting stuff. Let's talk about the in-universe reasons for why this could happen, and this is where it gets extremely fascinating and exciting. If you were some normie that lived in the Sonic Adventure 2 universe and you quickly glanced at the TV at nighttime and you see a dark, shadowy figure that kind of resembles that hedgehog that saves Station Square, you might be thinking to yourself that that's Sonic, especially if you have a similar level of knowledge as like the average parent does about the Sonic franchise. And let's talk about Sonic for a second. When you look at Sonic, he's basically the same exact size and silhouette as Shadow for the most part. The average normal person, they see those two hedgehogs and they might not be able to tell the difference. And here's the reason why the color scheme doesn't actually matter as much as some people might think. Yes, Sonic the Hedgehog is blue. But what did he do in front of all the citizens of Station Square at the end of Sonic Adventure? Well, he turned from blue to yellow. So if the average citizen in the Sonic universe knows that Sonic could be blue, he could be yellow, he's also a mutant alien talking hedgehog, you don't think that maybe they could mistake a hedgehog with black fur for Sonic? I don't think it's really that far-fetched to really understand. Keep in mind also, Sonic Adventure, I mean, I guess technically takes place in the past, so maybe they didn't have as good of cameras. Maybe the camera angle wasn't as good. Maybe the lighting wasn't as good. When Shadow committed all of the crimes, like stealing the Chaos Emeralds and stuff like that, Shadow was committing his crimes at night. So it's like, you know, it's dark out, maybe it matches his fur a little bit. Glance at the TV, quality's not that great. Yeah, that's Sonic. That's that mutant blue hedgehog that changes colors that I saw on TV. There's also several points in the story where other characters also mistake Shadow for Sonic as well. I mean, if you just quickly glance at the silhouette, you might not realize that, hey, that's actually Shadow. Amy does it. Even Dr. Eggman, when he originally frees Shadow, for a second thought it was Sonic. You know, it's a little bit dark in there. Maybe he just sees the silhouette quickly and he's like, oh wait, that's Sonic. Also, Sonic and Shadow recognize the similarities between the two as well. So it's pretty much established in universe that they are similar enough for people to mistake the difference between the two. Now, let's get into some of the fun stuff. Let's get into some of the more conspiratorial stuff, but I think we'll be able to tie all this together and make it make a lot of sense. We have to talk about the elephant in the room. We have to talk about G.U.N, Guardian Unit of Nations, the military that is responsible for Project Shadow in the first place. These people who are chasing after Sonic all throughout Sonic Adventure 2, you don't think that they knew a little more than they were letting on to the general public? Their role in Project Shadow and all of the tragedies that have derived from it cannot be denied or understated. Let's start from the beginning real quick. 50 years ago, Project Shadow was conceived by the then president of the United Federation under the guise of achieving immortality. However, at the same time, they were really using this research to develop weapons of mass destruction. They tasked Eggman's grandfather, Professor Gerald Robotnik, at the head of this project. Gerald's motivation for doing this project was to find a cure for his granddaughter's terminal illness. The Bio-Lizard was the first prototype of the ultimate life form that was developed, and obviously he was a failure because he required life support to even stay alive. He also was unstable and went on a rampage. So they basically locked him in the basement of the Ark. Kind of messed up when you think about it. A lot of people feel a little bit of sympathy for this character. He's like Shadow's mutant brother that nobody actually liked. As time was running out, Gerald was getting a little bit more desperate in order to create his ultimate life form, which is why he met up with Black Doom and promised him the Chaos Emeralds in 50 years in exchange for his DNA to create the ultimate life form, which was Shadow the Hedgehog. The government sees this and like, yo, we gotta shut this down. These guys are like total weirdos. So the government, in fact, goes to Space Colony Ark to shut down Project Shadow. But guess what happens when they shut down Project Project Shadow. Boom. They kill a 12-year-old girl in cold blood. They end up taking Gerald Robotnik into custody. He ends up going into madness, so they execute him. And then the government locks away Shadow the Hedgehog for 50 years. I mean, at this point, they just want to rid themselves of this project and have nothing to do with it. Imagine if the general public finds out the government is conducting shady research that involves artificially creating life forms, communicating with aliens, resulted in the death of an innocent 12-year-old girl. Imagine what the public would think about their government if some of this stuff got out. Well, guess what happens 50 years later? Shadow was released by Dr. Eggman, and now the government is probably saying, oh my god, Shadow from Project Shadow has escaped. The general public cannot find out about this. Should the people find out that their government is involved with all of these shady schemes, which involves the death of their own citizens and developing weapons of mass destruction and communicating with aliens, and not only that, the ultimate life form hedgehog that the government is directly responsible for creating is currently trying to destroy the entire planet, you can understand why the general population may lose trust within their government if stuff like this is happening. They need to absolve themselves of all the responsibility fast. It's definitely not a good look for the government also if it got out that they murdered a 12-year-old girl. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. It could potentially cause the government to be destabilized and lose its legitimacy to govern. And how do governments derive legitimacy? Well, there's a lot of different ways. You know, you gotta have elections, you gotta have rule of law, but this doesn't automatically grant legitimacy. State legitimacy rests on the citizens' perceptions and expectations of the state. If the governed population catches wind of corruption within their own government, which could directly lead to the demise of that population, this can cause a lot of upheaval and mistrust. The consent of the governed refers to the ideas that a government's legitimacy and moral right to use state power is justified and lawful only when consented to by the people or society over which that political power is exercised. Should the people find out about these schemes and there's general mistrust in the institutions amongst the governed population, they lose their legitimacy and it's a big problem for that said government. So what does the government do to combat this? Well, they manufacture consent through the media. So even in Sonic Adventure 2, maybe it's possible that the government somehow got Sonic confused for Shadow. The Sigma Alpha 2 unit, which actually captured Sonic the Hedgehog in the beginning of the game, maybe they're just somehow confused. Well, we know that the government knows about Project Shadow and knows who Shadow is, as evidenced in the Shadow the Hedgehog 2005 game. The gun commander is well aware of the Ark situation and also hates Shadow. So this idea that this top secret government intelligence military agency gets these two characters confused seems highly unlikely considering the intel that they have and considering their role in the actual creation of Shadow the Hedgehog. So since Shadow is on the loose, it's possible that the people could figure out about this project. So the easiest way to quell this project is most likely to get someone to blame for this and keep it far away from this Shadow the Hedgehog figure as possible. How do you do that? You capture Sonic the Hedgehog and then you pin all of Shadow's crimes on him. As a matter of fact, guess what happens in City Escape? It's all over the news. It's all over the cameras. You got this blue hedgehog destroying everyone's property in the city, causing massive amounts of destruction. And not only that, at the same exact time, Sonic ends up defeating the gun robot at the end of City Escape. So now you have it on camera of Sonic committing all these crimes. Now it's a lot easier to get this Project Shadow nonsense swept under the rug because you now have a perpetrator to blame. Hey, look over here. There's nothing to see behind the curtains. It wasn't us who created Shadow the Hedgehog, who is now trying to destroy the world with Dr. Eggman, who is also the grandson of someone that we executed along with his 12-year-old daughter while trying to create weapons of mass destruction and communicating with aliens and trying to seal this away and hide it from the public. It was actually, just look at this hedgehog to distract you from the other hedgehog who's doing all the bad stuff. Which, by the way, we are directly responsible for all of this. During the same exact day where Sonic is running through City Escape, there's also footage of Shadow breaking in and robbing somewhere for a Chaos Emerald. So now you got Sonic on camera in broad daylight, fighting the government, running through the city, destroying the property. You also have Shadow at night on camera committing crimes as well. So the people probably see that and they just mistake Sonic for Shadow because they think it's all one thing. That's why it's not so far-fetched that the people do not understand the difference between Sonic and Shadow, in addition to all the other arguments and examples that we used. The government's able to sweep this under the rug because they're able to give bad intel to the media, who's going to blast off misinformation to the public that, hey, look guys, it's Sonic the Hedgehog committing all these crimes. He's gone rogue. Don't look at us. We didn't do anything wrong. I mean, he's on camera fighting gun robots. He's on camera destroying the city. It's a much easier sell to the public in order to cover up their own crimes. My own fun little theory aside, I think that this probably explains how people got Sonic and Shadow confused at the very least. I think it's an extremely plausible theory that the government set up Sonic so that they could be absolved for all the atrocities that they committed during the Project Shadow debacle. And I think we did a good job of explaining why it's very likely that people could trick Sonic for Shadow, especially when you consider the potential media manipulation that the government could have been involved in order to cover themselves. So tricking the general population into believing that Sonic was responsible for these crimes definitely takes a lot of heat off of them. So when people ask, how could the story of Sonic Adventure 2 have this this scenario where people mistake Sonic for Shadow, and it's very far-fetched, comes up into conversation, this is why I think it's really not as far-fetched as you may think.
Where is Shadow? Do you really think that the professor created him, Shadow, to carry out the revenge on all those who live here on Earth?
Nothing bites more than having to listen to this dreadful conversation.
Eggman, you bite!
Stories in Sonic the Hedgehog games are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. Most of you probably don't understand that reference. But in all actuality, I can't think of a series that has just gone through so many different identities throughout the years as the little blue talking rat franchise. But is this for the better? Is this good? Should Sonic have serious stories? Well, let's do a deep dive into that question. To understand Sonic stories, you must kind of first understand the history of the Sonic franchise. Briefly, let's not waste your time over here. I know time is important to you. But the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise was born to compete with Mario. Sonic was meant to be seen as like the cool, edgy version of Mario. For example, take a look at this picture right here. He's so cool. He's playing a guitar, and not only that, he's wearing headphones nowhere near where his ears are supposed to be. Does it get much cooler than that? I don't think so. On some level, they are kind of like speed-based platformers. I know people don't think of that when they think of Mario, but if you watch anyone speedrun a Mario game, you'll find out pretty quickly, especially in the 2D games, going fast is something you can do. Major categorical differences when it comes to the storytelling of the Mario franchise and the Sonic franchise could not be more stark. The average Mario story is about the plumber going wahoo, jumping around and saving a princess. The storytelling of the Mario series is kind of meant to be very limited as far as like the 3D mainline platformers go, because the real magic of a Mario and Nintendo game is that you're going to get something that's extremely polished with extremely good gameplay. Gameplay first, story is a much larger afterthought. Compare that to the stark contrast of some of the stories and moments you'll see in Sonic the Hedgehog games. I think that's the reason why many people are gravitated to him in the first place. Look at moments like this.
Let's do it!
More on this later, but the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise initially started off with pretty light stories. I mean, given the fact that the technology was very primitive at the time, there wasn't really much story you could tell in these games. I mean, as early as Sonic CD, you start to see what Sonic was about with this opening cutscene that kind of just shows, like, this is the anti-Mario. This guy's here to maybe tell a story greater people would have imagined for a blue talking cartoon character hedgehog. And furthermore, a game like Sonic 3 and Knuckles kind of shows, even given that limited technology, they were trying to tell a crazy story. I mean, look at the mural up top that kind of foreshadows the Doomsday Zone. You have a story of friendship. You have a story of betrayal. You have a continuous story nonetheless. I mean, the way the story progresses through the cutscenes is something that was kind of revolutionary for the time. It was clear that from early on, the original intention of Sonic stories was to be something that was to be taken a little bit more seriously, as evidence when you progress through the franchise's history with the first true 3D outing with Sonic Adventure. Akinori Nishiyama served as a story event director and scenario writer for the game, and boy, did he cook. He was able to juggle 6 different concurrent stories that were intertwining and weaving throughout, with tons of lore that still sticks to this day. When you think about the Echidna tribe, you think about Tikal, you think about Knuckles, Chaos, you think about all the lessons that are learned in the story. You learn about a power-hungry ancient tribe's quest for power, which eventually led to its downfall. You learn about what it means to be your own person and stop living in your idol's shadow. You learn about your purpose and your past. You learn about how to take care of the weak and learn to stand up for yourself. You learn what it means to protect those you love, even if it means destroying those around you and yourself. You even learn how to recover your frog friend who runs away from you. All jokes aside, it's clear that Sonic Team's ambition with this story was something that really separated from pretty much any other platformer franchise or franchise that was directed at the same age demographic. Sonic was meant to be a little bit more serious in terms of its storytelling. And to this day, a lot of people clamor for the adventure type storytelling because they think that these are the best stories the game has ever had. And then the next game after Sonic Adventure 1 was Sonic Adventure 2, which in my opinion is the best Sonic story ever told. I mean, there's a reason why this game is getting adapted for the third Hollywood blockbuster movie. It's because it's widely viewed as the best story that they ever had in terms of writing, characterization, backstory. This is the first game where Shiro Maekawa served as one of like the main writers for the Sonic franchise, and he is a popular name within the fan base because a lot of people love the games that he wrote or contributed to, including Adventure 2, including a lot of the early 2000 Sonic games, and he even helped supervise write Sonic X Season 3, which a lot of people consider to be the best season of the show. But back to the plot and significance of Sonic Adventure 2. To not even go fully in depth on the game's story, the game includes a backstory with a government conspiracy theory to shut down a research facility used to cure a terminal illness, which ends up with the death of a professor's young granddaughter, with the manipulated hedgehog's memories to carry out revenge against humankind. Like, to not even do the full story, I mean, just right there, it shows how in-depth some of these stories were. And then the game ends up with chill-inducing moments where Sonic and Shadow go super to team up to save the world at the last minute, which culminates with the supposed death of Shadow the Hedgehog, because technically this was supposed to be the last Sonic game, so Shadow was supposed to die. He just came back with popular fan demand. Like, all the moments in this game just give you the absolute chills, and anyone who played this game through the years growing up will always remember this game for its story. Unfortunately, after Sonic Adventure 2, the Sega Dreamcast and Sega as a hardware manufacturer as a whole had ceased to exist. So the future of Sonic was looking pretty bleak. That was until Sega decided to keep the Sonic franchise afloat and keep their company afloat as a whole by swapping over to a game publisher as opposed to a hardware manufacturer or console manufacturer. And Sonic Heroes was the first game that was a result of this move, and it was the first multi-platform Sonic game. And the storytelling in this game definitely took a little bit of a step back. Not that it was bad, like the characterization of the characters was definitely still on point, but story was something that took a little bit of a backseat. While there was still an interesting overarching plot, like in my opinion, growing up, seeing the Neo Metal Sonic plot twist at the end definitely blew my mind as a kid. This was my first Sonic game also, so it was my first experience like seeing Super Sonic, and that's kind of those chill-inducing moments that kept me coming back to Sonic over and over again. But yeah, overall, the tone of the Sonic series and Sonic franchise remained largely unchanged throughout the years, up until about 2006 with Sonic 06. That was probably the biggest franchise-changing moment. Shiro Maekawa wrote most of the Sonic stories going forward, other than Shadow the Hedgehog, which is written by Takashi Iizuka, I believe. Sonic 06 was probably the biggest turning point for the franchise. After this game flopped, it was clear that Sega wanted to go into a different direction, which is why it did kind of a complete 180 with the gameplay and even somewhat of the storytelling with Sonic Unleashed. And although the story kind of adhered to a lot of the similar principles, it was definitely a step back and a little bit more lighthearted, but it still had the great characterization. Although it's not too crazy that Sonic Unleashed had a little bit of a different tone for the story, well, still pretty good because it was actually written by Kyoko Yoshimura. I guess you could say, though, the real true tonal shift probably happened after Sonic and the Black Knight. Ironically enough, this is a game that a lot of people in the franchise consider to be the best voice acting and characterization and personality of Sonic the Hedgehog. And to no surprise, this is the last game that Shiro Maekawa, the original writer for Sonic Adventure 2, had involvement with writing the story for. Because we then move into the meta era, which is kind of where this discussion even happens. So, before we move on to the meta era, which is games like Sonic Colors, Sonic Forces, Lost World, Generations, I want to talk about a defining name for this era of Sonic storytelling. A lot of people considered Sonic to be a shonen protagonist in the early years of the franchise. A shonen protagonist is a character in manga or anime. Shonen protagonists are often characterized by contradictory qualities, such as being short-tempered and cool, or mischievous and rebellious. They may also appear to be good for nothing but have hidden abilities. Another common trait of shonen protagonists is having a lot of talent in a specific area, such as a fighting potential, heroic instincts, or a unique power. Shonen media often explores themes like friendship, perseverance, heroism, and coming of age. Some popular shonen series include Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Piece, My Hero Academia, and Attack on Titan, but adults can also enjoy these stories. So when you think about the early stories that Sonic used to tell, the word shonen is something often some fans may associate him with. Keep that in mind as we move on to the next era of storytelling, which has a very, very stark contrast.
Eggman, I am going to save this planet, and I am going to free these aliens. No copyright law in the universe is going to stop me!
So as you can tell by that cutscene right there, Sonic Colors marked the departure from those more serious stories and the shift into the more Saturday morning cartoon, lighthearted stories that did not have these existential battles, crazy life lessons, and battles against demon gods. It turned out to be just Sonic versus Eggman. And honestly, this is something that was needed at the time because most Sonic games that were received in the era of shonen, quote unquote, were not really received well, unfortunately. This is when once again again, the writing staff for Sonic games changed. We now had Ken Pontac and Warren Graff as the writers. To be fair to both of these individuals, it did come out in an interview recently that they had very little say in the franchise and the Sonic team writing directions. To cut them a little bit of slack, that's context that needs to be added in there. And basically every game for the next 10 years, Sonic Colors, Sonic Generations, Sonic Lost World, were very lighthearted and bare bones stories. And here's the thing, this worked. Sonic Generations and Sonic Colors are two of the highest received Sonic games of all time. They had the lighthearted stories, but the thing about these games is that the gameplay was really good. Kind of similar to the Mario formula. So for a little bit, this was the direction of the Sonic franchise, and it seemed to be working. The games were kind of revived a little bit. But what happens when this stops working and the games start getting received poorly? You had a flop with Lost World, which had once again one of those like more lighthearted stories. You also had the Sonic Boom debacle, and then Sonic Forces releases, and this was probably the final straw for the fans as they were left disappointed with this game. It tried to capture the essence of some of those older Sonic stories, but didn't quite work. Now, Sonic fans are looking for a new direction. Sonic Movie 1 releases, and it's a huge success and brings a lot of new eyes into the franchise. It was once again reeling, but now with this new influx of fans, a reset was once again in order.
You are the key.
Sonic Frontiers was released in 2022, and this felt like it was Sega's last chance almost to make a good 3D Sonic game. Since there was a bunch of flops, people were wondering, is Sonic Team capable in the current day and age of making a solid 3D platformer? And I think Frontiers answered that question for a lot of people. It wasn't perfect, right? I mean, there's obviously some issues with the game. It wasn't unanimously loved, but it was received a lot better than most people thought it was going to be, receiving an 8.5 out of 10 fan score, with a lot of people actually enjoying this game, including myself. This is actually one of my favorite 3D Sonic games ever made. And one of the biggest things about this game was the return to form with a more serious story or a higher stakes story. It was definitely a somber and melancholy story that delivered a lot of Sonic fans extremely memorable moments like the Titan fights, as well as the transformation into Super Sonic 2. For what it's worth, I do have my issues with Frontier's story. I don't think it's the best Sonic story that's ever been, but one thing I can really appreciate is that they were trying to recapture the essence of what made Sonic stories good in the first place. They made Sonic cool again. The story took itself seriously. Frontiers gave us some great memorable Sonic moments that really push him to his limits, and the memories and moments in this game are going to be things that stick with us long after this game's release. It's been a long time since we got serious, dire existential stakes in a Sonic story with all the supersonic boss fights and all of the cool moments and dialogue between the characters. Not only was the story a significantly different tone than the decade prior, in my opinion, the writing and dialogue between the characters was significantly improved as well, and that is because they brought on writer Ian Flynn. Ian Flynn has been involved with writing Sonic stories since 2006 with Archie Comics, and he was previously one of the writers for the comic books in IDW prior to getting brought on for Sonic Frontiers. And Sonic Frontiers ended up being one of the fastest selling 3D Sonic games of all time. The success of Frontiers and kind of giving Sonic fans what they wanted to see after all these years is probably going to lead them to having a stronger emphasis on stories and lore. For those who don't know, they hired a lore manager back in 2022 to make the universe more meaningfully connected. So it seems like leaning back into that signature identity that Sonic has that kind of separates him from his contemporaries is something that they're going to focus on going forward. Even by looking at the next mainline title, Sonic and Shadow Generations, the Shadow portion is definitely going to lean into Shadow the Hedgehog's backstory, which is one of the most compelling stories that Sega's ever told before. It seems like Sega may be leaning into these like more in-depth stories going forward. It's not to say that every single story needs to have the dire existential stakes, but I think at the very least, one thing that these games cannot have is mischaracterization or bad dialogue. The story doesn't have to be super crazy, but you also want these characters to be handled well, and I think that's going to be a priority going forward. So, after all that, do Sonic games need good stories? Well, obviously the answer to that is a little bit complicated. Does a video game need a good story? Games like Sonic Generations, while few and far in between, prove that you don't need a good story, but here's the problem. Not every Sonic game is as good as Sonic Generations. It only works if the gameplay is absolutely fire like Sonic Generations. This is not a perfect world we live in, okay? Me, I think it is extremely important though that Sonic games do have good stories, because I believe that the actual appeal of Sonic, after all these years, all the games that have done so poorly, what is the one thing that kind of binds us together? It's that Sonic the Hedgehog is really cool. Some of these awesome moments and battles that you see in Sonic games are not things that you'll see in other franchises, and these are the moments, at least to me personally, of course this is all my opinion, these are the things that keep me coming back to Sonic over and over again. It's the memories and the chills that you get when you experience some of the climaxes in these Sonic games. To me, it's moments like this that are the glue that binds the Sonic community together. I'm telling you right now, ask anyone who's played Sonic Adventure 2 growing up, even if they're not Sonic fans anymore, but they all have fond memories of playing this game growing up, and one of the main reasons why people love it and they were so immersed by the story and why it stuck with them after all these years, and of course why it's being adapted for the Hollywood film, is because the story is so good. It's like, do we like every treasure hunting stage in this game? I don't know. Do we love every single mech shooting stage in Sonic Adventure 2 also? I don't know. I mean, listen, I personally don't. But you know what we do love? Love Sonic the Hedgehog jumping out of a helicopter on a little skateboard that he made out of the helicopter's propellers. We love the fact that Sonic and Shadow can go super. I just think that's the coolest thing ever. And then we love the fact that Shadow sacrifices himself to save the world. Like, this really got to us. The story that was told in Sonic Adventure 2 is something that is franchise defining. One of the most important things about Sonic Adventure 2, above all other things that people will always remember fondly, is the story of the game. It's one of the things that's integral to the legacy of it. And the moments created in the story are the things that create lifelong Sonic fans, as opposed to people that just come and go. So I think one of the most important things is telling a good story. Most importantly, getting these characters right, because they are so cool when they're at their best. So writing and dialogue and all that stuff, characterization, is extremely important as well. And that's something that I think should not be negotiated on. I think the characters should always be on point. I'd say the biggest issue with the storytelling of the 2010s of the Sonic games is not necessarily that they're lighthearted or have like joke, comedy, funny moments. The problem with these stories is that the characters are written poorly. Like, the writing in this game is not good, and I feel like the characterization is also not accurate. Now, the reason why this is probably, well, one, due to Sega mandates for the writing, allegedly, due to Pontac and Graf's explanation for why the stories were not as good, but also the fact that these two writers allegedly didn't really even know much about Sonic. So the thing that sticks out about why most Sonic fans don't like these stories probably boils down to the writing, dialogue, and characterization. So those are some non-negotiables for me. So here's what I think about Sonic stories. I think every Sonic story needs to at least be good. It doesn't have to be the most serious story. Like, it doesn't need to be as somber and dry as Frontiers, but it does need to take itself seriously. Unleashed is a pretty good example of that. Like, the story has a lot of lighthearted and great moments, but also the plot in of itself, as well as the climax of the game, does take itself seriously. Characterization of the characters needs to be on point, and it needs to be accurate to all of their descriptions. In addition to that, Sonic has to be cool in every single game. He cannot be a self-referential dork, similar to things like Sonic Prime. I do like when they lean into the shonen storytelling elements, and I think that that is the best direction for Sonic. And I also think that every single Sonic game needs to have a really cool climax. Like, it needs to have a cool final ending that really shows us how cool and powerful Sonic is. These are the things that I think really gives the character his signature identity and has made him so appealing to us for so long after all these years. And it looks like, based off of Sonic and Shadow Generations and Sonic Frontiers, that they're going to look to do that as far as their mainline games go. Well, let me know what you guys think about this. Are you more about gameplay only? Don't care about the lore, don't care about the moments, don't care about the climaxes in the game? What is your ideal Sonic game story?
Every world has its end. I know that's kind of sad, but that's why we gotta live life to the fullest in the time we have.
So, why do we like Sonic games? Sonic is a franchise that obviously means a lot to me, and probably you if you're watching this, as you can see by my t-shirt here. It's a franchise that spanned 35 years, and the question is, how? I mean, on paper, get it? There are better gaming franchises in the same exact niche. You got the Super Mario series. Sony just dropped Astrobot, which was literally Game of the Year. Some could argue the Crash Bandicoot series might even be better. But why do we keep coming back to Sonic? Time after time, failure after failure, Sonic still has a die-hard, loyal cult of fans. As much as we all hate to admit it, we're in a cult. In my opinion, there are several pillars as to what this phenomenon is. So let's go through them. Starting with the character himself. The character Sonic the Hedgehog is extremely cool. From the opening of Sonic Adventure 2, the CGI cutscenes from Sonic Adventure 1, I mean, that just sends the chills down your spine. Even Sonic Heroes has a cool CGI cutscene in the beginning. You see Sonic running backwards. That was my first experience with Sonic, and that's when I knew. I was like, damn, this guy really is cool. And I was a diehard Mario fan growing up, and when I saw that, my love for Mario started to wane a little bit, and I became obsessed with Sonic. Especially, what really solidifies it for me is Super Sonic. When when all hope is lost, the giant god has just gotten the upper hand. Sonic gets 7 Chaos Emeralds, he goes golden, he can fly, his quills go up, his eyes turn red, and he can seemingly defeat anything. I think my real solidification for my love of Sonic for the rest of my life started when I saw Sonic Heroes, the final boss battle, when Sonic went super and they had the Crush 40 music playing. More on that later. You have a character that has plot armor like none other. He's the fastest creature in the universe. Despite being 3 feet tall, he's able to defeat gods, and the character himself is the embodiment of freedom. In a real world where so many things are out of our control, it's always refreshing to see a character that embodies living life by your own way, not compromising on your values, and being cocky, confident, and having a smile on your face while doing so. Some of my earliest memories in kind of having this gravitation towards Sonic started with the Sonic X TV show. I mean, if you look at the first episode where you see Sonic running backwards, not really even saying much, just literally running, showcasing his ability, and smiling, taunting people while being effortlessly cool, and kind of having this rebellious attitude was something that certainly hooked me in. Mix his confidence with really good voice acting, in my opinion. I love the early Sonic voice actors. It was a wrap. I mean, if you look at Mario, he barely even talks, which I think also contributes to Sonic's appeal as well. And it's not just a nostalgia factor. You'll even see these characteristics present in Sonic Frontiers. Look at this cutscene right here, where he doesn't say anything, but you know exactly what Sonic is about.
Your cyber corruption is accelerating. How can you smile when you can barely stand?
Combine all this with his iconic design, the smirk, the blue quills, the contrasting red shoes, you have a character that people gravitate to, and above anything else, despite the quality of the games, the movies, whatever you think, people are just simply flat out deeply connected with the character Sonic, and he means a lot to a lot of people. The next pillar that kind of ties into Sonic's character as well is the storytelling of the game. Sonic games often have a greater focus on narrative and storytelling. It was much more prevalent from like Sonic Adventure all the way to Sonic and the Black Knight. But let's take a look at Sonic's contemporaries. Like, for example, his biggest rival at the time, I know we hate to say this, was Mario. And if you look at the typical Mario story, minus the RPGs, the typical Mario mainline platformer game, it's like Bowser kidnaps the princess, Mario has to go save the princess. Now, granted, story doesn't necessarily make a game better, as you all know, but when you look at the average Sonic the Hedgehog story, usually there's something more deeper at play. When you look at the first 2 adventure games, you have stories like E102 Gamma, you have the lore of the Echidna tribe, which culminates with Chaos destroying Station Square, but the power of Sonic and his friends' positivity is able to charge the emeralds to make him go super again in order to counteract that and correct Chaos's behavior by addressing it instead of pushing it aside. You even have stories like obviously Sonic Adventure 2, which introduces Shadow and the whole Project Shadow lore. Think about a lot of people who maybe haven't played a Sonic game in like 20 years, but they played Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. The average person that played those games and they haven't touched a Sonic game since, most of them are like, yo, that game had the best story. Sonic and Shadow going super at the end, how cool was that? The story was amazing. Live and Learn playing in the background when you're fighting the final hazard. Stories are very important because they immerse the player. They again contribute to this gravitational pull that people have towards the character Sonic, and it all kind of ties together. There's a lot of lessons to be learned in Sonic games, like in Sonic and the Black Knight. Every world has its end, which is why you should live your life to the fullest. Sonic Unleashed, do I need a reason to help a friend? Shadow Generations, it's about moving on from your trauma, but also honoring your loved ones. Sonic Frontiers, doing anything to protect your friends. And also, when you talk about the story of Sonic games, the climaxes are usually the best parts of the game. There's this phenomenon that I personally have when I play Sonic games. Usually when we get to that climax, we get to that final boss fight, you usually get the chills. I don't know if it's just me, but these cool moments are something that really stick with me and keep me coming back over and over again to play the next Sonic game. These are some of the highs that I feel like you don't really experience in other gaming franchises. Sure, the gameplay could be better, and also you might not even like story, but at the same time, this is something that I think helps people connect with the character Sonic and why we like the franchise. So Sonic is a video game franchise after all, and I guess we should talk about, you know, the actual video games. So why do we like the Sonic games? Some Sonic fans don't even like the Sonic games. No, seriously, there's a real meme for that. Granted, over the years, they've reinvented themselves and swapped different gameplay styles. We started with the classics, we went to Adventure, we went to Boost, and some other weird things in between. But I think the simplest way to explain this phenomenon of why we actually like the Sonic games is to focus on the core gameplay loop. The core gameplay loop is something like this. You get from point A to point B as fast as possible. Along the way, typically, there will be be multiple routes to do so. Sometimes if you're good enough and you can maintain your speed, which is a big part of the gameplay, you might take the top route, which will get you there faster. If you're not as familiar with the level design, you might make a couple mistakes. You might end up on the bottom route, like a water level, for example, and that will give you a slower time. I think in the simplest terms, the idea that you're racing against the clock and mastering the level design will get you a better time is something that's very rewarding. Mastering a Sonic game is probably more rewarding than almost any other platformer franchise. Let's also talk about how at its best, the series and the games feel really good to play. Perhaps a really good example of this is in Sonic Generations. Think about the overpowered spin dash in Crisis City. Being able to use the overpowered spin dash and keep your pace is one of the most satisfying things that you can ever do. Now, think about it like this. You're doing one section of a level. Imagine you're maintaining this type of pace, not this type of pace, I'm in the lava, throughout the entire level, let alone one singular section. That is why Sonic games are the gift that keep on giving. When you're playing a Sonic the Hedgehog game, simply put, you're playing one of the most unique platformer experiences probably ever. Think about Mario Maker 2. How easy is it to make a Mario level? I think I could slap together a Super Mario level in like 20 minutes. Probably less. Now, if you've ever played the classic Sonic Simulator game on Roblox where you actually have a full-blown Sonic level maker, it can take an extremely long time to make a very simple Sonic level. Because in order to account for the speed and integrate platforming, you're going to end up using a lot of level. Think about the boost games. How much terrain do they have to design in these games just for Sonic to fly right past them? The creation of a Sonic the Hedgehog game is vastly more complex. And to further elaborate on how unique the Sonic games are, it feels like his moveset is very different than other platformers. Typically, other platformer games, it's like you just jump and you land on platforms. And that's why they're called platformers. But because Sonic has the most unique movement, it feels different than almost every other game. A Crash Bandicoot and a Mario game, while yes, there's nuance, obviously, save the paragraphs in the comments, they feel a lot more similar than how a Sonic game feels compared to those two. That's because you're moving at a fast pace and you have these unique moves such as the homing attack, you have the boost, you have the spin dash. It's not always perfect and it's not always pretty, but you are getting something uniquely different than the competitors. The idea that Sonic's like canonical power, which is his speed, is perfectly integrated into the gameplay, especially when you think about the boost games, there's something about that just works so perfectly. In a world where we're craving constant stimulation with these little boxes right here, there's nothing more stimulating than the sense of speed and thrill of completing a Sonic the Hedgehog level. Whether it's adventure, whether it's boost, whether it's classic, the core philosophy for the most part always remains the same. The Sonic genre of games are platformers that play like almost no other. It's about going fast and maintaining speed. Most other games are about vertical platforming or skilled or precision platforming. It still exists in this one, but in some games, it gets turned up to the next level because you're going at a breakneck pace. Playing a Sonic game is almost competitive. Sometimes you're racing against your friend's best time, sometimes you're racing against yourself. And that's why this time attack philosophy will always make Sonic games feel rewarding to play. It feels like the time that you put in is actually building towards something. And watching someone complete a Sonic speedrun is just straight up awesome. So I think in a nutshell, I think that's why we like Sonic games. It's the progression, it's the dopamine from hitting a certain route that took you a couple times to hit. It's just flat out rewarding. So I think the fourth and final major pillar of why we love Sonic games is the music. Everyone's heard the expression before, the Sonic game may not be good, but if there's one thing that's true, the music always slaps. How good the music is dates back to the Genesis days. Even on 16-bit hardware, they were able to make some absolute bangers. They even recruited Michael Jackson to work on Sonic the Hedgehog 3. That's how you know they had aura and clout. You can't necessarily say music is something that makes a game, but when you take all the other pillars like the character, the gameplay, the stories, and the music, and you put it all as one harmonious package, it greatly enhances the experience. Sonic has had all different types of genres such as hip-hop, jazz, rock music. I think Sonic was like my introduction to rock music. Even nowadays, they dabble in EDM. I'm not like the biggest EDM guy. I would prefer if they went back to more of those traditional soundtracks, but it still works. Some of those cyberspace songs absolutely slap. I think the best example of all four pillars being in action is probably the ending of Sonic Adventure 2. You have Sonic, the character, being cool and going super. You had all the good gameplay that kind of led up to that point. You have the storytelling where Sonic and Shadow have to save the world. And then the icing on the cake is Live and Learn playing. Live and Learn is an absolutely iconic song. It's hard to talk about Sonic games and the Sonic franchise without talking about the Sonic music. As a matter of fact, I went to a Sonic concert this summer called the Sonic Symphony, and it was a great time. Music is something that connects people. Music is something that enhances and immerses. Music is a language that transcends. Why do the Sonic Symphonies exist? Simply put, because all the songs in the franchise are iconic. You don't go on a world tour bringing all these fans together, singing the songs at the top of their lungs if music wasn't one of the biggest pillars of the franchise's success. Tell me you don't walk around humming all the songs or singing them by yourself. I know I do. Maybe I'm just weird. I don't know. When Super Sonic first went up against Giganto in Sonic Frontiers, I got the absolute chills because it brought that feeling back. So yes, music is one of those unique things that if you're telling the story about Sonic, you cannot leave out this part. So of course, there's a million reasons why people love Sonic. It is a community full of dedicated and talented fans as well. The sheer amount of talented artists, fan game developers, take a look at some of the Sonic fan projects that are out there that people create for free. You got things like PO6, you got things like SRB2. You have thousands of mods that were created for Sonic games. It just goes to show how much the franchise has impacted everyone. For some people, Sonic can provide that escapism to get away from the problems that we face. There's probably only one franchise in the world that could come back from something like Sonic 06 or Sonic Boom, and that is the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. That's why Sonic Team wrote the song One Way Dream. And that's because it uniquely impacts all of the fans. And without a diehard loyal fan base that deeply connects with the character, this wouldn't happen. But ultimately, I would love to hear from you guys why you love Sonic.
I put out a tweet the other day asking people what was their favorite Sonic ability. And I feel like the comments and discussion were pretty good. So I was like, hey, why don't we make a video about this, talking about Sonic abilities and which one I think is the best. We're gonna stick to what I believe to be his core, like traditional main moveset. For example, something like the spin dash. If we did every ability, this would probably be like a 17-hour video. But if there is an ability I left out that you really like, feel free to respectfully bring it up in the comment section, and it's meant to be more of like a discussion kind of video. Anyways, let's get into it. So I feel like we have to start with the most famous Sonic ability, which is the Spin Dash, which is the ability to rev up by rolling into a ball, charging up your speed, and getting a free instantaneous boost of speed. The ability was first introduced in the greatest classic Sonic game of all time. Hello, Sonic 2. Argue with yourselves in the comments. And some classic Sonic purists may even think that this was the downfall of the classic Sonic formula, because traditionally 2D Sonic games were about earning your speed through trial and error and memorizing the levels that you play over and over again. However, the Spin Dash, you know, if you run out of speed and you can't get through an obstacle, gives you that free out, which kind of continues into the future when you think about the boost formula. That's a different discussion. We're talking about the Spin Dash, baby. This move was essentially a staple in the classic Sonic formula and even continued all the way up until the next gen Sonic 06 when you think about like the Spin Dash and mainline 3D games. However, the game flopped, and that was that for the Spin Dash. Not only is the Spin Dash a speed... Not only is the Spin Dash a speed hack, it's also a way to attack enemies. So, you know, it had some utility for sure. While the Spin Dash does give you free speed, it does adhere to the principles of classic Sonic games by preserving your momentum. For example, if you tap the Spin Dash, you go down the hill, it kind of has those slope physics as you maintain that momentum, which was kind of the charm and magic of the old Sonic games. Another thing that I find crazy about the Spin Dash is since it's Sonic's most iconic ability, it's gone under the most radical transformation out of any ability. It's almost like no two Spin Dashes were created the same. I think the most famous iteration of the Spin Dash, other than like the original 2D classic Sonic one, was definitely the SA1 Spin Dash. This is definitely the most busted way to use it, but you can basically spam the Spin Dash to gain as much speed as you want. So SA1 speedrunners have made use of this ability to be able to get some crazy times and honestly just have really fluid and masterful controls over their character at high speed. This is personally my favorite version of the Spin Dash, but I'm guessing that this was not intended by the developers because in Sonic Adventure 2, the next game, it basically functions the same way, but there's a little bit of a delay to how quickly you can use a Spin Dash. Instead of being able to spam it and actually have fun, you had to slow down and charge it up. I mean, it's still pretty much the same. Definitely takes a huge gameplay strategy out of the game. In Sonic Heroes, they transformed the Spin Dash into what is called the Rocket XL, which definitely changes up how it's used. And it's honestly kind of weird in this game, to be honest. It made a return to the mainline Sonic games with Sonic Generations, although be it this was like 2D Sonic. Spin Dash was extremely fun to use in this game because you just tap the button and it's so broken, but it definitely makes the classic Sonic gameplay worth playing because it's interesting and different. The Spin Dash should eventually return in 3D with Sonic Lost World, but again, even in this game, it functions extremely weird and different than how it used to in the old classic Sonic games. Definitely one of my least favorite versions of the Spin Dash. And the Spin Dash returned finally in the 3D games with Sonic Frontiers, and it was the most different and unique version of the Spin Dash yet. Essentially, it was like a boost, but if you go off a slope, it disables gravity for like 2 seconds and allows you to make some some of the craziest skips possible. So the spin dash is constantly undergoing changes. No two spin dashes are alike for the most part. And that's a brief and shallow history of the spin dash. Let's move on to the next ability. The next ability on the list is the homing attack. Now, the homing attack allows Sonic to lock onto a target while he's jumping, so it kind of guides him and gives him some course correction for when he's jumping in midair. Not only that, the homing attack also gives you like a little mini push or like a little air dash that kind of gives you a little bit of forward momentum in midair if you're not locking onto something. The roots for this ability trace back as early as Sonic 3 and Knuckles with the fire power-up, and it's not the same because you're not necessarily locking on to targets, but at the same time, it's pretty close to the intended function of the homing attack, or it's at least the earliest version of it. The first official lock on to an enemy homing attack can probably also be traced to Sonic 3D Blast when you have the golden shield, although it's very different to how the homing attack functions now. It's probably the first version. The homing attack was put in the game to offer course correction to players going at a high speed. If you think about the original pinball physics of classic Sonic, having no course correction in midair when transitioning into 3D was going to be a problem. It largely remained the same in most Sonic games all the way up until like Sonic 06, where the biggest difference was instead of having like an air dash that drops you forward, this one actually maintains your height and then drops you after a couple seconds. So it's pretty similar, but again, that's basically what the homing attack is. It's like a crutch to help make the transition from 2D to 3D in Sonic a little more smooth and give some more platforming flexibility. In addition to its functionality, it also offers different ways to platform in Sonic. Like, it helps you get to certain places that you otherwise would not be able to get to. The only true radical change that they made to the homing attack was, of course, in Sonic Lost World, because they just made everything weird in this game. Instead of like a direct way to platform, it had this weird lock-on situation where you like get 3 separate targets. I can't even explain this homing attack in words. So weird. It sucks. Doesn't function great. I hate it. It's been in pretty much every single Sonic game since Sonic transitioned into 3D, so we have to include the homing attack when it comes to Sonic's core moveset. But let's move on to the next one. The boost ability is probably the most divisive when you think about the Sonic formula, because this is when the way the gameplay in the franchise was structured was changed fundamentally. What is the boost? Well, everyone knows what the boost is. It's the ability for Sonic to go max speed with the tap of a button. However, this gameplay is not really momentum based, it's all about reaction. The boost ability was first introduced in Sonic Rush for the Nintendo DS back in 2005. And the boost formula was a little bit different in this game. You know, you had like a boost meter, but you were able to replenish it through the use of tricks. Sonic Rush was interesting because it had a unique take. I mean, you had the spin dash in this game, you had the boost, you had the homing attack. It's in 2D, but this was the first instance of it being used, and ever since Sonic Unleashed, it was the formula for the 3D games going forward. So oftentimes when you talk about the divide in the Sonic franchise, it's really like the adventure, spin dash, momentum-based gameplay versus the boost, reactive gameplay. It's two different formulas, but these are like the two main styles, other than like the classic games, obviously. But when you talk about the 3D games, these are the two main styles. While the boost isn't necessarily my favorite version of the Sonic gameplay, as you guys may or may not know if you follow this channel, I'm much more of a spin dash, momentum, adventure fan. The boost can definitely be fun, and it's definitely satisfying to pull it off when you can memorize the levels and string together all of the moves that are available to you. I think the boost formula kind of peaked with Generation, although Unleashed is my favorite boosting game in terms of the daytime levels. One of the things I don't like about the boost is like the 2D sections, which is kind of a necessity to the formula because you need to have some type of platforming that breaks up the breakneck pace, and I think it's best done in Sonic Unleashed because it's more of like reactive base. It's more 2.5D in a lot of ways. I think it's definitely best done in this game. But again, it's my opinion. You know, I kind of grew up with the other formulas. So that's kind of just like what gravitates me towards Sonic more. There's still some incredible and great Sonic games in the franchise that feature the boost. And there's not really too much to the ability. I mean, it's like you tap the button, you go fast. You have the quick step. You got some other abilities that are essential to making the gameplay formula work. Other than the fact that the boost was removed in Sonic Lost World, because again, that's just a very strange game. It's just weird. The only radical change to the boost was probably Sonic Frontiers, where it turned more into like a glorified run button, because in my opinion, the Frontiers gameplay is more of like a boost and adventure hybrid. The speed was significantly slowed down. The boost is pretty straightforward. There's not really much to say. You tap the button, you go faster. Some people love it, some people hate it. Let's move on to the next one. The next ability is also one of my favorites. It's the bounce ability. The roots for this ability, at least in my opinion, can be traced back as early as Sonic 3 and Knuckles when you had the little bounce power-up. Seems like a lot of these Sonic abilities originated from Sonic 3 and Knuckles power-ups. That just goes to show how impactful this game was. What does this ability allow you to do? I guess we can do our history out of order and skip ahead to Sonic Frontiers to best demonstrate, because the bounce and the stomp are actually on the same button. So if you're doing the stomp, it allows you to quickly descend, and it helps you have more precise platforming and descend quicker. Bounce will help you reach higher heights. Also, since we're on the topic of Frontiers, the bounce attack is really good in this game in combination with the air boost, because it allows you to pull off some really fun platforming sequences, allows you to change direction mid-air. In the 2D section especially, it really shines and outshines Generations. Yes, I have some praise for cyberspace, believe me. I know a lot of people hate on it. But anyways, obviously there's a lot of history to it, but this was kind of like the final product of the ability. The move was first introduced in 3D back in the adventure games, and this is how it functioned. It was basically a way to go higher. If there was a higher platform that you wanted to reach, you would spam the bounce attack, and then you would be able to get up there. Also, it was just pretty good in general for stringing together movements and resetting your homing attack. Overall, the bounce is definitely one of my favorite moves that they've ever introduced to the Sonic franchise. Another great thing that the bounce attack was able to do is when you're like stringing together moves in Sonic Adventure 2 trying to get an S rank, you can preserve your trick combos by just spamming the bounce. Now, back to the stomp portion of this. I know that the bounce and the stomp are two very different abilities when you really think about it, but I'm kind of lumping them in together. Now, the stomp ability is extremely important specifically to the boosting formula. The reason being is that the stomp is like the only way to correct yourself when you're overshooting something. So instead of overshooting this platform with the boost, I'm able to stomp. Pulling off a successful jump, stomp, boost combo, or whatever you want to call it, I don't even know if I put the words in the right order, is definitely one of the most satisfying things. And without the stomp ability, the boost formula is severely hindered, in my opinion. And the best way to demonstrate this is probably Sonic Dream Team. This is a game obviously developed for mobile and touch controls. A very good game at that. A very brilliantly designed game with really good levels. One of my biggest criticisms of this game is that it has a boost without a stomp, and you really feel that, or at least like reflexively, you want to use your stomp ability in this game, but you just can't. So the stomp ability is almost as important as the boost is in the boosting gameplay, in particular for more precision, because when you're running super fast, you lose that precision. It allows you to string together extremely satisfying move combos, so that stomp ability is very useful, and because it's so useful, I feel like I had to include it. Let's move on to the next ability. The next ability on the list is the Lightspeed Dash. This is also a fan favorite ability, which first introduced in Sonic Adventure 1. The way it functioned in this game is you actually had to charge up the Lightspeed Dash in order to actually use it. So if there's a trail of rings, Sonic can go through it and quickly get through a path. There wasn't many changes to this ability, but again, I guess in Sonic Adventure 1, the biggest thing about this was it had to charge, but also you could use it as an attack, which was pretty cool. Just like that. Yep, there we go. After Sonic Adventure 1, it was modernized and just used as a one quick tap button in order to activate, and this is probably when it was at its best, and this is pretty much how it functioned for the rest of the franchise. Most games had it, you know, here and there, some games didn't. But I think the Lightspeed Dash is definitely at its best when it's used for alternative paths, or even if you look at Metal Harbor, sometimes you're able to use it to do extra tricks and stuff like that. The biggest change that the Lightspeed Dash underwent since Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 was probably in Sonic Dream Team, when you were able to homing attack Lightspeed Dash chains, which honestly, in my opinion, was definitely pretty cool. And I think it's a pretty useful and functional way for the Lightspeed Dash to function. And I believe that's the route they're going to go for Sonic and Shadow Generations as well. Not much really to say about this ability. I mean, that's pretty much the entire history of it. Most people like it, and if integrated into the level design correctly, can be an extremely fun way for Sonic Team to design levels. Let's move on to the next ability. The next ability on the list is the Drift, and this was something that was mainly used in two games, Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Generations. I mean, it was used in other games, but it was only consistent in those two games. The move, essentially, when boosting at high speeds, allows Sonic to have more control over his turns. Drift, in my opinion, was probably used at its best in Sonic Generations. I think the animation looks cooler. I think it was a little bit more easy to use, a little bit more functional. It's a pretty simple ability, but definitely important to the boost formula overall. It did appear in colors, but it was very limited and only for certain sections, and honestly wasn't that good. But also, it was in Sonic Frontiers for one measly cyberspace level, and it was absolutely awful. I don't know why they put it in Frontiers in this capacity. Maybe they could have even made it an actual move for the open world. I'm sure it would have been cool. Like, having more freedom and controls, I feel like is usually a good thing. Yeah, in Frontiers, it was absolutely awful. That was the last time they used it. It's kind of a shame that we never got to see the Drift again, the way it was used in Generations. Maybe it'll make a comeback in a future Sonic game. But let me know what you think about the Drift. The Next ability is a slide ability. Most people probably don't think about this when they think of Sonic's moveset, but this is something that is often synonymous with the boost formula. What this ability does is it allows Sonic to slide forward and knock things down in his path. Despite the fact that it's largely associated with the boost formula, the game was actually first technically introduced in Shadow the Hedgehog. I mean, other forms of its functionality, like somersault rolling under obstacles, was also introduced in Sonic Adventure 2 technically as well, but the actual slide ability was first found in this game. Was then again spotted in Sonic 06, once again to attack enemies but also get under crevices that you needed to get under. But in terms of functionality, this move is more so for reactive based sections in Sonic boosting games. Like if you look right here, he's going to boost and press B to give you kind of something else to do in the controller and react to when you're boosting at breakneck speed. Very simple ability, kind of slept on and underrated, and definitely most essential to the boosting formula, but I figured since it's in a lot of Sonic games, we had to include it. The drop dash. This is a banger ability. This is probably my favorite ability to use in the 2D Sonic games, and it's mainly for the 2D Sonic games. It was first introduced in 2017 Sonic Mania, and it definitely revolutionized the way 2D Sonic was played. What it is you jump and you can drop right into a spin dash without having to stop and charge it up. So this really keeps the pace going, and if you're a speedrunner, it's definitely going to help you move as quickly as possible through some of these sections. Like, look at these movements that I'm able to string together. The drop dash is not only a 2D Sonic move because it was actually recently added in Sonic Frontiers, albeit it's not really too useful in this game. Like sometimes it's useful for helping to scale terrain, but as far as like the actual functionality of the move, you don't really need it. But the thing is about Sonic games, and I think that Sega should focus on just like the core movement and freedom and creativity that the players are allowed to express with the platforming. So I like the idea that we have a drop dash. Even if it's not as useful, I definitely had fun going down slopes with this because this was like one of the only ways you could experience actual slope physics kind of in Frontiers prior to them adding the momentum sliders. The move is so popular and synonymous with Sonic at this point, the drop dash is also going to be retroactively added into the Sonic and Shadow Generations remaster, even for the 3D modern Sonic sections. Definitely a W. More tools at our disposal, the better. With that being said, it's definitely one of my favorite moves in the game. Where does it rank for you? So there's tons of core Sonic abilities. Again, I know I left a bunch out. Honorable mention to the Wisps and Colors. Honorable mention to the Tornado ability he has in Sonic Heroes. Honorable mention to all the gem shoes in Sonic 06. The list goes on and on. But my favorite abilities out of all the ones listed, I think we have to split it up into two categories. If I had to go my favorite 3D ability, it's probably the 3D Sonic Adventure 1 Spin Dash. The amount of paths, skips, and cool gameplay techniques that you're able to use using this Spin Dash while also maintaining quick pace and fluid controls definitely puts this at the top of my list. Also have to give a big shout out to the Frontier Spin Dash as well. This move has probably revolutionized the game for me, and traversal around the world, especially when they design platforming challenges around this ability, really fundamentally changes the game. I feel like it's super fun to find different skips but also fly around through the level. I know it's probably not a popular answer because it does kind of skip a lot of the design elements of the original game, but if you look at like me scaling the tower on this platform using the Frontier Spin Dash, it's just way too fun to use. So Frontier Spin Dash has got to be one of my favorites as well. We're talking about the 2D games. While there isn't many abilities for Sonic, it's got to be that drop dash. The drop dash changed the way that I play classic Sonic games, and I almost have a reflexive instinct to constantly spam the drop dash at all times. It's basically like the spin dash on steroids, and it really allows me, and when I'm able to maintain drop dash after drop dash, keep my speed going, there's nothing more satisfying in a Sonic game than using that ability. So as far as Sonic abilities goes, those are my two favorites. Let me know which one is your favorite, but also let me know which one I missed that might be your favorite as well. I was streaming a couple days ago, and a viewer actually brought up a good point to me. He asked me which Sonic games I'd like to see remastered and what's a candidate for being remastered, etc. There's a reason why this is actually interesting to talk about, and that's because the head of Sonic team, Takashi Iizuka himself, has said that the team is up for more remasters. As you know, over the last couple of years, we've gotten Sonic Colors Ultimate. We have the current game that's dropping in just a couple of months, Sonic and Shadow Generations, which comes with a remake of Generations, but also a new game at the same time. And we also just recently got Sonic Origins and Sonic Origins Plus. Sega, for the last like 2 or 3 years, has been saying if Sonic sales are doing well, we're going to remaster and remake more games. This is something they've been saying for a while. But here's the current statement of what Takashi Iizuka had to say about Sonic remasters, which brings up this discussion. He says, when we remastered Sonic Colors, there was Sonic Colors Ultimate, we wanted to think about what we can bring next as a remastered title. At that time, Sonic Generation was kind of what everyone was really excited about. I don't know who was excited about it, but we'll keep going. What they really wanted and what they were really hungry for. That's why we chose to do Generations, and we added a Shadow portion. Depending on what people like out there, if there's a title people like, we'll think about it for the next remaster. The first thing we should do before we get into the most unlikely and likely Sonic remasters is give you a very, very brief history of Sonic remasters and remakes. When it comes to Sonic remakes, remasters, and even re-releases / ports, the first thing you could probably point to is Sonic Jam. There's been some other one-off re-releases, but this was like a full-blown Sonic team release that had like a little 3D hub world. That was one of the first true experimentations of 3D Sonic, but the game also included re-releases of Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles with minor graphical enhancements. As a matter of fact, when you talk about Sonic remakes, remasters, re-releases, one of the only things you could realistically point to is the classic games. These things have been ported and re-released like 100,000 times. You had the Sonic Mega Collection from 2002, which featured several classic Sonic games in addition to the original trilogy. The Sonic Gems Collection had some other games like Sonic the Fighter, Sonic CD, Sonic R, then like some of the Game Gear games. So at this point, they were kind of re-releasing their entire catalog for more modern home consoles and third-party platforms. So while most remasters, remakes, re-releases, whatever you want to call them, for Sonic games were basically just classic Sonic ports, the first 3D Sonic game to get a re-release or port or enhanced version was actually Sonic Adventure 2 Battle for the GameCube. This was, of course, not too long after the original Sega Dreamcast went under and Sega stopped making consoles. Here's a common theme, though. While there were some advanced features in this, it's widely considered to be a worse version of the original Dreamcast version, and the same can be said for one of the other only 3D Sonic re-releases or remakes or remasters, which was Sonic Adventure DX, which again, a lot of people considered this version to be inferior to the original Dreamcast version. This definitely made way more drastic changes, and you could consider this a full-blown remaster. It was re-released a couple of times, but was basically like the deep fried meme where it gets worse and worse with each re-release because they did it on the PC, they ported it to the Xbox, they ported it to Steam, and it got worse every time. But other than that, mainly it's classic Sonic games getting remastered. We also got a port of Sonic 1, the Game Boy Advance, and believe it or not, this was actually one of the worst Sonic games ever. Some people even consider this to be worse than Sonic 06. In many ways, it made the game more inferior, and the fact that you can barely see the screen is a huge problem. But they did add the spin dash to it, at least. Yeah, right? I mean, that's good. We got the Sonic Classic Collection, which was released for the Nintendo DS back in 2010, which actually included Sonic 3. For the first time in a long time, like a lot of people will point out that Sonic 3 was a little bit less accessible than some of the other classic Sonic games, but they did do this. But the best versions of the classic Sonic re-releases that they ever did were the Christian Whitehead mobile ports. They did Sonic 1, they did Sonic 2, they did Sonic CD. When you think about like some of the best ways to play this game officially, these have to be it, with the widescreen support, beautiful graphics, QOL changes. These were certainly a bright spot in a pretty rocky history of Sonic re-releases. Sonic Lost World got a re-release in 2015, which was good because it was basically stuck on a dead and dying platform in the Wii U. So it was cool that other fans were able to actually access this game, despite the fact that I really don't like it that much. So maybe other games in the Sonic franchise, like Sonic Unleashed, could get this treatment in the future, but we'll talk about that later. Fast forward a couple of years later, we got Sonic Colors Ultimate, which seemed to be a good idea at the time because Sonic Colors is a very beloved Sonic game. Like, it's one of the highest rated 3D Sonic games of all time. So they kind of wanted to release something after the movie that they thought would be incontroversial, that like most Sonic fans would enjoy. The only problem is the remaster got pretty botched by the third-party studio that released it. Was it their fault? Was it Sega's fault? I don't really know. I don't want to get into the details. But tons of graphical issues and glitches really left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. The next year, we got Sonic Origins, which was released in 2020, and we got Sonic Origins Plus in 2023. This was supposed to be the definitive way to play the classic games, but again, there was a lot of fan discourse about these games and certain things that they didn't like about it, like some of the soundtracks, some of the glitches, some of the bugs, some of the features that were available considering the fact that it was like $40. Also, the weird DLC. They gave the DLC for free to new players, but players that purchased the original game had to pay extra. There's a lot of fan issues with it. If you want to look it up, you can go look it up. Personally, I didn't really hate the game. Most recently, we also got a Sonic Mania port to mobile from Netflix Games. Once again, this was an inferior way to play the original game. They removed some features from the original Sonic Mania, like the time trial mode. The touch controls also were not that great, and there's a bunch of other issues. Like I said before, it's like an inferior way to play the game. We're not going to get into that completely, but again, it's just another botched re-release / port. Fast forward to the current day and age, we are now in the era of Sonic and Shadow Generations, which is going to be coming in a couple of months. So next Sonic remaster is on the way, and the question in everybody's head is like, are they going to get this one right? They have a rocky history with this stuff. Obviously, I missed a couple ones before, but I kind of gave you the general brief history of it. So in addition to this game, the question is, what other games are extremely likely candidates for remasters, remakes, ports, whatever the case may be? Well, let's get into it.
What goes up must come down. Yeah, my feet don't touch the ground.
Let's start with a game that had a lot of buzz and heat with respect to getting a remake or remaster, and that is Sonic Heroes. Out of all games listed, this game actually is ripe for that type of treatment, and the reason why is that it's a pretty decently received Sonic game. It's got its critics for sure, but compared to a lot of 3D Sonic games out there, it's actually one of the higher rated 3D Sonic games. This game is a prime candidate for something like a remaster in my opinion. I think that the game looks decent and good enough. It has this very vibrant and cartoonish aesthetic that is very true to the original Sonic design from the 90s, just in 3D. The visuals to this day actually hold up pretty well due to its art style. I think almost in a way, it holds up better than the adventure games. As you all know, there was huge buzz a couple of months ago about Sonic Heroes not getting a remaster, but a full-blown remake. Now, I think this has since been debunked, or at least deconfirmed, but regardless, it does bring up an interesting discussion. There's allegedly some issues with doing a full-blown remaster of this game and just porting it, because I believe the engine that the game runs on, Sega no longer has access to, or there's some licensing issues with it. I believe with EA, now you could fact check me if I'm wrong on this, but that could be a potential obstacle for this game getting just a straight up remaster, which it could use. I mean, you could simply just port this game over to modern platforms. That's why when the rumors were going around about Sonic Heroes getting a remake, they were talking about it being developed in Unreal Engine 5, which Sega is hiring developers for, so keep that in mind. The reason why this game would work is because it's actually the least accessible out of every single game that we will list off on this list. This game is stuck on 2004 hardware, and for the most part has not really been made accessible since. Maybe there was like a virtual console release on the Wii or something that I didn't know about, so don't actually me in the comments, but yeah, you get the point. So there is some problems though, because the game is a little bit divisive. You know, you don't want Sega to release games that could potentially get low critic scores, so they would probably have to fix a couple things. In particular, some of the things that people don't like about the game is the fact that the speed characters have some slippery control, so maybe a quality of life improvement to the collision or whatever, the movement of the game for the speed characters could be something that works. Maybe that's something they'd have to address in a full-blown remake of the game. I don't know how this works, okay? Another thing that people often criticize about this game is the fact that in order to actually beat it, you have to play it 4 times in a row with very minimal changes to the level, so you're basically doing the same thing over and over and over again. So people really don't like that. So perhaps some QL will have to address this. Like I said before though, one of the biggest things is that the game isn't even accessible via like backwards compatibility like some other Sonic titles we'll mention on this list. It's not available on Nintendo Switch hardware, which is kind of like the #1 platform for Sonic games currently. So this game, if they remastered or remade it, would definitely have an audience, and due to how inaccessible it is, I think it's certainly a prime candidate for something like this. Could you just potentially port this and upscale the textures, put it in HD? I think they can get away with that. If they were able to actually use the engine and just actually polish up the game, like remove some glitches, make sure that the collision's okay, it would probably work. I mean, you just run into the issue of the fact that critics may or may not like the game due to how divisive it can be for some people. However, if you don't have access to the engine and you need to use something else, I think a ground up remake actually makes sense for this game. I don't think it's the #1 deserving Sonic game of a full-blown remake. We'll get into that. Let's move on to the next one. One of the most popular games on this list with huge growing calls for a remaster or remake is definitely Sonic Unleashed. This game over the years has experienced one of the best rehabilitations I've ever seen for a Sonic game. When it was first released, this game had extremely middling reception. You got these dog water reviews from gaming outlets like IGN that just didn't really understand the magic and charm of it. After Sonic 06 flopped commercially, we officially abandoned the adventure formula for 3D Sonic games, and we now move towards the boosting formula, which was first utilized in Sonic Rush. While the critics may have not liked this game, the fans certainly love it, and it's probably due to the divisive nature of the Werehog, which is this button-mashy combat system. Although it's pretty in-depth if you compare it to any other Sonic game. Fans of this game will say that the combat in this game is actually significantly better than Sonic Frontiers. Regardless, the day stages in the game and the boosting is probably the least divisive, since it's been the franchise's formula for a long time, and I personally think that this was the best way the boost was ever utilized. But the issue of the Werehog is something that probably could scare Sega from doing a full-blown like remake or remaster of the game in general, but that's beside the point. In my opinion, I think this game is actually ripe for just like a port to PC, like straight up. Like, we need this game on PC. But in reality, this game does not need a remake. It just simply needs a remaster. To this day, it's still one of the best looking Sonic games, if not the best looking Sonic game. All you would simply need to do is upscale some of the textures, make it run in consistent 60 frames per second on all platforms, not just Xbox, because this game actually did get a 60 FPS patch for the Xbox Series S and X. But but you can still see the graininess of the texture. So yeah, quick little upscale would do this game justice. Wouldn't really have to do much, right? It would be an easy remaster for Sega. A lot of people would want it. I would argue that even more so than Generations, people have been clamoring for this. This game definitely deserves some type of a remaster. I feel like the critics should give this game one more chance. I'm really kind of split on this. I'm like, does this game deserve a remaster? Maybe, but also a PC port to Steam or something like that would make a lot of sense. It's just that the game is somewhat available. With that 60 FPS patch, it really does change the game, but also at the same time, like I said, the middling reception that the game got when it first came out makes me think that they may think twice about remastering a game like that, because that could be a handicap, and you know that they're very much paying attention towards the critic scores. So I don't know, you guys let me know down below in the comments. You think it's likely it'll get a remaster? Do you think it's likely it'll just get a port to PC? At some point in the future, one or the other will happen. Let's move on to the next game now. All right, people, time to get to the elephant in the room. Full-blown remakes of the Sonic Adventure games. I'm going to be extremely biased here. These are my two favorite Sonic games of all time. Believe it or not, my inspiration for Sonic 2 being in the first place was when rumors of these games getting a remake or a remaster was extremely heavy back in like 2020. So with respect to the conversation of does this game deserve a remaster, does it deserve a remake, I believe that these games deserve full-blown, ground-up modern remakes. What do I mean by this? We need something like the Crash Bandicoot trilogy. They did a modern remake of this game. It looked absolutely incredible, and by the way, it also sold a lot of copies. There's clearly demand and appetite for games like this. You know, it just feels like they don't make games the way they used to, am I right? So this is the treatment I'd like for the adventure games, primarily due to the fact that these games are relatively accessible. They have full-blown Steam ports of this game. They re-released it for the PS3 and Xbox 360, which I believe is available via backwards compatibility. Like, I can still play this on my Xbox right now. Sonic Adventure got the Adventure DX treatment. Sonic Adventure 2 got the Battle treatment. Like, we have 2010 re-releases of these games. I don't really want to see this game in its current state anymore. I want to see something evolve to the next level, and I think that's what Sega wants to do as well. Takashi Iizuka himself said that Sonic Adventure 2 is his favorite Sonic game, so I think that Sega would really want to make sure that they get these games right. They wouldn't want to potentially ruin the legacy of these games. There's also aspects of both of these games that, you know, didn't age well. In particular, you look at the cutscenes with the voice acting. The cutscenes definitely did not age that well.
Watch out! You're gonna crash! Ah!
As much as I love the original voice cast of these games, and I actually would prefer them, I would probably want to bring in the modern cast to redo all the voices, because if you look at the voice acting of this game, fun fact, when they recorded this, I think most of the actors didn't even see the game. Like, they were just blindly recording lines. The animation doesn't really fit, so you probably would have to get new voice lines in this in order to make the cutscenes match the tone and emotion of the voice acting. Or maybe bring back the old voice cast. I don't know if they'd be able to do that. Some people, obviously, they wouldn't be able to. But also, with respect to the gameplay, there are some things that haven't aged well. Now, I think the Sonic gameplay, I think in terms of his controls, are actually the best they've been in the series for the most part. But you look at things like the camera, some of the wonky collision in the games, there's certainly some QOL and polishing that could be touched up with a modern remake. I just would like to see this game given the Crash treatment. Both games, they're super important to Sonic's legacy. So Sega would have to first show us that they can even get a 3D remaster slash remake done right in the first place. Because you look at Colors, it was kind of a disaster. Origins had some level of middling reception amongst the fans. So we're going to put this to the test with Generations. Hopefully that's successful, and hopefully it opens up the door for the adventure games to get remade. But I know someone like Takashi Iizuka would certainly want that to be done justice and done correctly. So it's a long way out, but before the Sonic franchise ends, between now and the next 30 years, we will see some type of remake for the adventure games. It's not going to be a remaster. They're doing a full-blown remake, and obviously they would need to get this on Nintendo consoles as well. That's what I think is most likely. I mean, there was rumors that they were going to do this back in like 2015. I mean, it's not confirmed, but like, they know that we want it. I think they just got to get it perfect. I expect nothing less than a full-blown remake. I mean, look at the Mystic Ruins right here. Imagine this on a modern game. Like, it would just look so good. Well, let's move on to the honorable mentions, because there's still some other stuff out there. So for this segment of the video, we're going to talk about games that are honorable mentions. Games that sometimes in the comment sections you'll see people asking for. We will go less in depth, but we'll talk briefly about the likeliness of some of these games getting remastered, remade, ported, whatever the case may be. Let's talk about a game that I see a lot of people in my comment section ask for, is a Sonic 06 remaster. I'm going to say that this will never happen. This is one of the most infamous Sonic games of all time, and it did generational setbacks to the Sonic franchise's reputation. While personally, I have a lot of fondness for this game. I grew up playing it and I genuinely enjoyed it. It felt like the true Sonic Adventure 3. It's well documented that this was a rushed out and poorly made product, full of bugs, glitches, bad loading screen times, weird romance elements in the story. I'm not going to go through everything. There's obviously well documented issues with this game. Now, Project 06, which is a fan remake of Sonic 06, definitely demonstrates that this game should have been the greatest Sonic game of all time with certain polish and tweaks to the game. There's no denying the fact that this game was an absolute meme and a disaster for Sega, so they probably want nothing to do with it. As a personal fan of this game, yes, I would love to see it, but from a business perspective, it's extremely risky to do something like this, so I'm gonna go with this is never happening. Let's move on to the next game. Another popular choice that a lot of people have for some type of remaster, remake, or re-release would be the Sonic Advance games. As far as official releases goes, this game is even less accessible than Sonic Heroes. Of course, you could play this on a web browser emulator extremely easily, but the fact of the matter is, as far as official releases goes, this game is stuck on the Game Boy Advance. A lot of people love these games because they have fond memories growing up with them. They're also one of the few 2D modern Sonic games, if that makes sense. The fact that they're exclusive to Nintendo platforms leads me to believe that a remake or remaster of this game is highly unlikely, especially when you consider wanting to push it to all platforms. But one thing I think is likely, potentially in the future, is these games coming to the Nintendo Switch online service. Like, if I had to go remaster, remake, or this would probably be the most likely option. Will Sega do it? That remains to be seen, but if we ever see new ways to play these games, my money would be on them coming to the Nintendo Switch online service. Would be super easy, and you can access the multiplayer features using the online service as well. So it's actually the most likely candidate. I'm going to talk about this super briefly. The storybook games, Sonic and the Secret Ring, Sonic and the Black Knight, I think these have no chance to come to modern platforms either, due to the fact that they were received poorly, one, and two, they were designed for the Wii with the janky motion controls. Figured I'd speak on this briefly just in case people don't understand, but I think it's pretty self-evident why they won't touch these games either. Last but not least, we have Sonic Rush and Sonic Rush Adventure. These are two games that I also believe are highly unlikely to get any form of remaster or remake. Obviously, people would want it, but there are some challenges with porting these games. In particular, the fact that they're made for the Nintendo DS with the weird two-screen system would make it quite difficult for them to port this game accurately. I mean, obviously it can be done, but with the dual screen system and the weird resolution that they would have to put the game in, means they would have to completely full-blown remake the game. So my opinion, I find it highly unlikely that this will happen.
You see right behind me? That is because of influence. When you talk about an iconic series like Sonic the Hedgehog, you have to ask yourself, what is the most influential Sonic game ever? Is it the first Sonic the Hedgehog game? When you have this conversation, it's hard to avoid talking about Sonic the Hedgehog 1. The reason why Sonic 1 is so influential is because, you know, he probably wouldn't be here unless this game released, but the influence of Sonic the Hedgehog 1 is so much deeper than it's just the first game, bro. You have Sonic, this blue hedgehog with red shoes, the perfect contrast, by the way. This character design alone is probably what kept the franchise afloat when we were dropping games like Sonic 06 and the franchise was on a downturn. As far as the gameplay elements and some of the aesthetics of the series, almost everything in the series can be traced back to the first game. We have tons of gameplay elements such as rolling, Sonic going into a ball when he jumps. That is something that's been in every single game since. And the fact that he can roll into a ball to preserve his momentum, while this isn't a staple of every single Sonic game these days, it's synonymous with the brand. The colorful, aesthetic, vibrant zones such as Green Hill, which has been quote-unquote overused in the Sonic franchise in like almost every game. You have the Green Hill aesthetic in Sonic the Hedgehog 1, 2, SA2, Sonic Heroes, Sonic Lost World, Sonic Frontiers. It's literally everywhere you look. The first Sonic the Hedgehog game is what catapulted Sonic and Sega to taking a giant chunk of Nintendo's console market share. Elements like rings, springs, badniks, goalpost signs, going from point A to point B as fast as possible with alternative paths for different skill levels of players, checkpoints, spikes, loop-de-loops. I mean, come on, almost everything from this original game still pops up in the series to this very day. And everything in between that has happened in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise since can all be traced back to the first game. Some may call it nostalgia pandering, but ultimately the influence that the first game had may be amongst the greatest in the entire series. Whenever it's time to present Sonic the Hedgehog to the widest and most general audience possible, and we're talking about strictly licensing, usually there's some version of Green Hill there. That's because it's the most marketable, and that's because it's the most iconic. And that is simply just a testament to how influential the first game was. I mean, look at that checkered pattern down there. That just screams Sonic. It gave Sega its reputation, it gave it its market share, and it gave it a ton of success. What about the second Sonic game? Sonic the Hedgehog 2 essentially improves everything that Sonic 1 does. I think the game is significantly better. It adds Tails, an iconic sidekick who is seen in almost every game since. It adds the Spin Dash, one of the most iconic moves ever. It adds the Death Egg, and it adds a little bit more of story as well as Super Sonic. So there's a lot of influential elements of Sonic 2 that impact the series today. I think at its core, it's just an improved Sonic 1 with some extra core stuff, as opposed to like global phenomenon that birthed the entire franchise. The first game will always have that leverage. As far as Sonic CD, introduces some core characters like Amy and Metal Sonic, some interesting elements such as time travel, which is also still used in the series. But ultimately, other than like the characters, this game certainly does not carry the same impact as the first Sonic game. Now, as far as Sonic the Hedgehog 3, it's hard not to say that this game is one of the most influential because it introduces Knuckles, an all-time iconic character in the series. Elements of it were adapted for Sonic the Hedgehog 2, the movie. You have the Master Emerald, which has been a major plot point and device used earlier in the series, not so much now, but I think it's going to make a comeback. As far as the actual game itself, like this is widely seen as one of the best 2D platformers ever. Probably the pinnacle and apex of the classic Sonic series in general. Like, yeah, Sonic 1's extremely influential, but 3 is significantly better. You have 3 playable characters, Knuckles' glide ability, Tails' ability to fly, and different routes for each playstyle. Like Tails is the easy mode, Knuckles, you can explore and find some cool things. The best and most experienced players who replay the levels a lot will be able to complete them faster because they know the faster routes. I think the biggest thing though we could take away from Sonic 3 and Knuckles in terms of its influence is story. Angel Island, an iconic set piece, while it's not used as much as it used to be, almost everyone who's interacted with the series knows and loves it. The idea that there's this like evolving narrative surrounded around friendship and betrayal, Sonic going super and fighting in the Doomsday Zone if you get all of the Chaos Emeralds, like using Super Sonic as like that plot device for a true final story. Now that is something that influences the series far beyond a lot of the things that happen in the actual game or its quality, because yeah, it's like one of the best. We also have to talk about power-ups in Sonic 3. The homing attack, it's pretty similar to the fire shield. The bounce attack, pretty similar to the bubble shield. The lightning attack kind of serves as that double jump, which you see in a lot of the boosting games. We can't really say it enough. The classic games are obviously influential, and a lot of the elements in those games still exist in the series today. It's hard to say one has the most influence out of all of them, but I guess you kind of have to go with the first Sonic game. Despite the fact that you could almost put all of them into one, since they all play so similar, but just added their own little bits and pieces to Sonic's rich history. Now, Sonic Adventure is an interesting case. This is Sonic's first true mainline leap into a 3D platformer, and I think it was pretty successful. There are definitely a lot of elements from the classic games that are borrowed and translated pretty well into this game. You have Ice Cap, which features Angel Island. You have the Master Emerald. You have Chaos Emeralds. You have a Super Sonic boss fight. You have multiple playable characters, and what's interesting about Sonic Adventure 1's multiple playable characters is that all the characters share the same levels. So that philosophy from Sonic 3 with Tails to be the easy route and fly is prevalent in his gameplay as well. There's also some new routes you can take. Same thing with Knuckles. He shares stages with Sonic. There's a lot of different places that you can go to and access using his gliding and climbing ability. In addition to that, this game introduces 6 playable characters with intertwining stories, which was something that was extremely relevant for this decade of Sonic games. Sonic Adventure was certainly the formula for the next decade in the sense that open zone is going to be the formula for the next decade. The greater focus on narrative and plot is something that remains to this day, and one of the most influential aspects is probably the redesign for Sonic. They took his iconic character design, gave him green eyes, longer limbs, made him a little bit more edgy, right? A little bit more cool. And probably most people think that this is the better design. You may not like Sonic games anymore. You may never even played a Sonic game, but that character design you definitely recognize. So the redesign for all the characters is something that certainly gives Sonic Adventure a case for being one of the most influential games. In addition to that, the adventure gameplay is something that stuck for a while. You have the more open level designs, kind of similar to the classics, that encourage exploration, just this time it's in 3D, so it's translated a little differently. You still have those rolling physics. I mean, it's not like true momentum, but there's certainly something there. If you go down a hill in the ball form, you will gain speed. Get to point A to point B as fast as possible. Platform. Sonic getting on a snowboard and going down Ice Cap, that's in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but also you see the exact same scene in Sonic Adventure. Sky Chase, which features Sonic and Tails trying to get onto a floating Eggman fortress, that's also in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. A casino zone with pinball physics, don't worry, that was also translated into 3D as well. So you'd be surprised. There's a lot of similar elements from Sonic Adventure and a few of the games that came after it that were directly ripped from the classic classic games. Knuckles getting tricked by Dr. Eggman was something that was taken from the classics. I feel like to me, Sonic Adventure is the perfect evolution of the classic formula in the 3D space, which Sonic was struggling to do for a while. But is this the most influential Sonic game? Well, how can you talk about this game without talking about Sonic Adventure 2? Sonic Adventure 2 introduced Shadow. He's the most iconic character next to the actual main protagonist. We have Live and Learn as basically the theme song for the entire franchise. By the way, both adventure games do a really good job of introducing different music genres into the Sonic world. You had hip-hop, you had jazz, you had some R&B, you had rock music. You may not like the Sonic game, but you probably like the music. They took the narrative focus that was established in Sonic Adventure and kind of Sonic 3 and Knuckles and took it to the next level. Sonic Adventure 2 is still the greatest Sonic story told to this day. There's a reason why it was adapted for Sonic Movie 3. And speaking of stories, I think one of the most influential things that this game does is that storytelling in Sonic games was never really the same after this one. Everything is kind of downstream from Sonic Adventure 2 when you talk about Shadow the Hedgehog, the Project Shadow lore, the introduction of Chaos Control, G.U.N being formed in this game, and people kind of using this game as an example to tell Sonic stories in like fan wish lists and things of that nature is probably its biggest impact and influence on the series. This game added rail grinding into the series. That's something that's always been a staple since. We still had the intertwining stories, although that was kind of a Sonic Adventure 1 thing that was established. This game is certainly influential, but I think more so than anything, it's just straight up iconic. Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 as a package, I feel like is kind of how you have to look at it. These two games definitely set the stage for 3D games for the next decade. While Sonic the Hedgehog was always the cool character, the cool mascot, I feel like Sonic Adventure 2 kind of solidified the fact that Sonic is a franchise for everyone. It's not just a baby franchise. There are people that to this day, they may have not played a Sonic game since SA2, they will still look back on that game and be like, yo, that shit was sick. I know that's certainly the case for me. We also have Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. How influential was this game? It did a lot of cool things, like had good OST, it introduced Silver. The climax was pretty sick. The influence of this game is that it influenced people to not play Sonic games, and it killed the adventure formula. So it probably influenced the franchise negatively. But I think another influential game we need to speak about is Sonic Rush. Sonic Rush is a game that just exhibits the energy and style of Sonic. This game had a lot of similarities to the classics, but it had its own modern twist. This game should almost serve as the basis for what a 2D modern Sonic platformer should be, as opposed to what they tried to do with Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1 and 2. The coolest thing about this game is that Sonic's style is greatly translated into the gameplay. The boost helps kind of accurately portray his speed. After all, he's the fastest creature in the universe. You have the trick system, which I think is the coolest thing. When Sonic goes in the air, you can spam the tricks to one, look cool, but also to keep your boost meter up. In addition to how fun it is to get launched up into a spring in this game and spam the tricks, you are also able to kick forward or kick up. So you had some cool movement options, but I think the biggest thing that Sonic Rush introduced was the boost gameplay formula. If there's one thing that has been a staple in the series since, and honestly like a genre defining thing, it's the boost formula. We had the classic, adventure, and boost. That's kind of the three major pillars of Sonic. So the fact that Sonic Rush started one of the major pillars just goes to show that this probably is one of the most influential games ever, and its gameplay style is still here 20 years strong. So Sonic Rush, in terms of the gameplay, probably has to be the most influential. It serves as a 20-year running pillar that was translated for the first time in 3D in Sonic Unleashed. You can't talk about Sonic Rush's influence without talking about how it influenced Sonic Unleashed, which kind of served as the mainline 3D inspiration for the games to come. It starts with Rush, but kind of ferments with Sonic Unleashed and turns into a whole nother monster. Not a werehog, by the way. But yeah, Sonic Unleashed took the boost formula and turned it into 3D. That thing that everyone liked in Sonic Rush, yeah, they don't like the adventure formula anymore because the game flopped. Why don't we put it in the 3D games? And it worked. The gameplay style for Sonic Unleashed is, to this day, at least the boosting levels, to be the best that the formula has to offer. It's not only about platforming, it's also about how fast can you react, how cool can you look while doing it. It took Sonic the Hedgehog, the fictional character with all of his canon abilities, and basically translated that into the actual gameplay. It was just so cool. I think the biggest thing about Sonic Unleashed is that it took the leap into 3D, but also took the 2D gameplay and integrated it into that 3D gameplay style. Without the 2D stages, some people would argue that the game is basically a glorified temple run. There's certainly more nuance to that, but the 2D sections, which are probably inspired from Sonic Rush, allow us to slow down the game a little bit and integrate platforming into the level design to break up the pace, and not only that, extend the length of the levels. The biggest problem with Sonic Unleashed is the fact that it had the werehog, but the gameplay style remained. Once other Sonic games flopped and we wanted to return back to form, we got Sonic Colors, another game that in its own right is pretty influential. They said, let's take the werehog style, throw it into the trash where it belongs, and let's just put the parts of the game that people liked and make it the entire game. Kind of genius if you think about it. The biggest things that this game influenced on the next decade of Sonic was the fact that they had lighter stories that were not as intense offensive. There's no romance and human princesses or whatever. There's no edgy hedgehogs with a gun trying to destroy the planet and aliens and weird stuff and conspiracy theories. It's just Sonic. It's like a Saturday morning cartoon. I can't say I'm necessarily a fan of this, but I understand why it was necessary in 2010, coming off of a lot of bad games. In addition to that, this game introduced the Wisps, which are still used in the series to this day. It introduces the double jump as a core part of Sonic's base moveset without any power-ups, and the Wisps in themselves are also cool little gimmicks and power-ups. So Sonic Colors is certainly influential. It has some original ideas, but it's certainly a product of some of the games that came before it. In the same sense that Sonic 3 Knuckles, while it was revolutionary, it's kind of just built off of the previous classic Sonic games. So as far as its influence, there's a lot, but I wouldn't say this is the most influential game. We also got Sonic Generations. This game is very influential in the sense that they separated classic and modern Sonic and basically created two alternative pillars. Classic Sonic was seen in additional games after in Sonic Mania, Sonic Forces, Sonic Superstars. So the influence of Generations was felt with respect to that. And the fact that we went back to like this nostalgia pandering kind of thing, which can be influenced from the first Sonic game. Going forward, they're like, hey, remember when our series was the top in the entire industry? Green Hill? Yeah, let's keep throwing that in everywhere. So Generations certainly extended that, and they just kind of perfected the boost formula. As far as its influence beyond that, that's really what it is. Other than some of those other things that I mentioned, Generations is more so a product of influence rather than being more influential in of itself. Although technically Shadow Generations was definitely influenced by Sonic Generations. Sonic Forces, you could say, is influential in the fact that because it was a flop, it gave us the era that we have now, and that's really all the good you can say about what it's done for the franchise. The Sonic movies, their influence really can't be understated. We don't get any of this without the Sonic movies, but we're talking about the games, so maybe that's a different conversation for a different day. But the final game that has the most influence in the Sonic series, I would say, is Sonic Frontiers. The last true full-blown mainline 3D game. Frontiers is obviously, as of right now, the basis for Sonic's future. In the sense that the adventure games were and the classic games were, we're now kind of in this open zone era. Every game that follows Sonic Frontiers until the next game flops is going to be this open zone formula. The gameplay loop is pretty simple. You platform and run around the open world, which is comprised of basically mini elements of Sonic levels. Do enough of the challenges around the map in order to access the linear stages, which are more traditional Sonic gameplay, and from there, rinse and repeat until you fight the boss and move on to the next island. We already know that open zone is the future because Takashi Iizuka said as much. He wants this to be the basis for Sonic for the next 10 years. The last Sonic game that we got, Sonic and Shadow Generations, also featured a mini open zone. Open zone is kind of just like this natural evolution of what platformer games are going to do. We saw it with Mario. We saw Zelda Breath of the Wild. Like, these mascot characters are going into these open giant environments because the hardware can now handle for that. Sonic Frontiers was seen as one of the most successful games in the franchise. We know that this is going to be the gameplay style going forward, so it's hard to understate Frontiers' impact. Some people even say that without Frontiers, we wouldn't even have Sonic games anymore because it was so successful. Time will tell, though. We still have like 5 years left in this decade, so the story about Frontiers isn't fully written, but as far as I'm aware, the influence can't be understated. So which game out of all these is the most influential? So at number 5 for most influential Sonic games, we're going to put Sonic Frontiers. I just talked about all the reasons why this is the case. The story is still yet to be written, as I stated before. Like, there's still time for more open zone games to come out, so if we get like 2 more, this can certainly climb up. While open zone in of itself is the main piece that we're talking about, there's elements of the next Sonic games to follow that make them more influential. At number 4, I'm going to put Sonic 3 and Knuckles. The reason why, despite the fact that it's not necessarily the original classic Sonic game, too much of the history and influence of Sonic can be traced back to this game. Most importantly, like the secret final supersonic boss that was a staple of the series for a while. Knuckles the Echidna was established in the story, and this is where we got the core trio of Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. The idea that Sonic games would have a little bit more story than some of the other platformer games available at the time certainly traces back to this game. It also just feels like too much of Sonic's history and lore is kind of like established in this game. Plus the multiple playable characters, you really can't go wrong with it. Number 3, I'm gonna go with Sonic Adventure. Too much that was introduced and established in this game is relevant to the series to this day. Fully voice acted and redesigned characters that are still used to this day. This game also had the hub worlds, which you could say is kind of like a basis for Sonic Frontiers. And again, just a lot of Sonic's brand identity was established in this game. I think you can also throw Sonic Adventure 2 in there as like a package deal. I feel like the best of both of these games would create the best Sonic game ever with some modern polish. It feels like leaving out Sonic Adventure 2 would be borderline criminal, and I feel like those two games together is truly how you have to look at it. At number 2, super hot take, I think we're gonna have to put Sonic Rush here. The reason why is because it established the boost formula. Whether you love or hate the boost, and I'm sure that there's some adventure or classic fans that don't like it, you have to admit that this has been the primary gameplay style of Sonic for like the last 20 years. As an adventure fan, that gameplay style has only lasted a couple of years, whereas this one has far outlived it. So I feel like just the introduction of this mechanic alone makes it one of the most influential. If you want to package it together with Sonic Unleashed, that's also fine. It's kind of hard for me to say one or the other because technically Rush was first, but Unleash was kind of like the 3D version of this, so do with that what you will. Number 2 is definitely like whenever the boost formula started though. Number 1 though, it has to be the first Sonic the Hedgehog game. Every bit of nostalgia pandering or everything that you see from the series pretty much originates from this game. Green Hill, rings, like Spin Dash, Sonic himself, Dr. Eggman, rolling physics, Chaos Emeralds, like pretty much everything comes from this game, and all the licensing and marketing for Sonic, usually elements of this game are present. It's that iconic, it birthed the franchise, it really can't be anything other than number 1. But let me know if you guys agree or disagree. So, Sonic Frontiers, it's one of those games that you either love or you hate. Some people act like this game kidnapped their family. But in all seriousness, Sega has made it clear that open zone is going to be the direction for Sonic's future. We already saw it in Shadow Generations, so it's nice to see that they're not going to be abandoning something that has a lot of promise. I also happen to like Sonic Frontiers a lot, so I just like them to build upon this in the next game. So there's 5 things that I'd like to see them do with Sonic Frontiers 2. Did that rhyme? So starting off, I think they should do a better job of designing the levels. And what do I mean by this? Let's take a look at right here, for example. Do you see what's next to Sonic? That is a spring. Typically, the objective of the game is to collect the memory tokens. If you simply go on the spring, you go through a lot of automated sections, basically to the point where you don't even have to do anything. And right there, you would get the memory token. In Sonic Frontiers, the game is definitely littered with a lot of these automated sections. It feels like they almost drag and dropped little bits and pieces of Sonic levels throughout. So we have the same exact objective over here. Instead of going down there on the spring and following the level design like I'm supposed to, how about I jump across and hit the spring right here, and then I got the memory token in a different way. So there's a lot of ways to attack this game, and I think that is the beauty of it. However, that is by my design, and I don't think the developers necessarily intend for that to be the case. Let's take a look at this section right here. Typically, you would just hop on these springs using just like homing attack chains, and then you'd go over here again, do another homing attack chain, and then you would hit off the spring, you'd go down here into another automated section, and then you would get the memory token. Or I could start from over here, I can boost, and I can just get it like that. So for me, finding these different and creative ways to attack these challenges is the gift that keeps on giving for this game. It's why I personally like it. I just like the freedom. On the other side of the argument though, there are people that are saying, hey, this isn't necessarily engaging or cohesive level design. So what if you kind of like struck a natural balance between the two? What if you gave the players the freedom to kind of make their own creative routes while also creating more engaging level design built around Sonic's moveset? In Frontiers, he controls better than almost any other game in the series. Probably the best Sonic has ever controlled in Sonic Adventure. So I think if they go more like that Final Horizons and DLC route with the open zone and create these levels that have actual platforming that take use of Sonic's skill set, if you look at this speed run that I'm doing right here, I'm able to pull off some crazy stuff. If you put more of this into the game and a little bit less automation, maybe a little bit more cohesiveness to the design, it will appeal to the most people possible as opposed to alienating some people who prefer less of the automated gameplay style and more of that actual freedom. The game kind of has this roller coaster feel. It's like you get onto the platforming challenge and then it just flings you off and then just drops you off in the middle of the world. And then you get interrupted by something like the shark, and more on that later. But I think in the next game, they should do a better job of integrating the actual world into the level design as well. Instead of these floating grind rails and platforms that people really hate, try to integrate some of the natural terrain into the level. I think one of my favorite examples of the open world actually being integrated with proper level design is this section right here in Ares Island. It has proper level design in the sense that there's multiple routes that you can take. There's an upper path, there's a lower path. There's also ways you can take advantage of Sonic's moveset in order to manipulate the level design and do some skips without necessarily like flying over the entire level design, and it's not completely automated. So adding more stuff like this into the open zone while integrating some of the terrain into the level design would be something that fans would really like. So I would say more of that and less of like these dash panels just kind of flinging you accidentally in the open world into like a 2D section or something like that would be more preferable. Perhaps they can add a couple more tools to Sonic's moveset. For example, I'm playing this fan game here called Sonic Horizons, and it has like a cool wall running mechanic. What if that was properly and smoothly integrated into the world's level design? At the end of the day though, Sonic is an absolute blast to move around in this open world, and some of the movements that you're able to pull off in this game is some of the most fun I've had with the series ever. So maybe I am a little biased because I do love this game, but I think striking that natural balance between what people want would be beneficial because more people would like the game. Hey Sonic, you Can you take care of this guy over here or what? The combat is also something that is much maligned with Sonic Frontiers, and maybe some tweaks and improvements could make it more engaging and fun. On the outset, the combat is extremely simple, which I think is kind of fun. Like, I'm playing a Sonic the Hedgehog game, so I don't necessarily want to be stuck doing combat sections. Once you realize there's not much challenge to it, and you can kind of just hold the parry button forever in order to block your enemy's attacks, or you can sit there and spam the same combos without any resistance from the enemies, you kind of realize, yeah, the combat's a little too simple, and maybe there's not enough challenge, and maybe this isn't great design. So I would think that the worst part of the combat in the game is actually probably the Guardian boss battles, because it feels like they kind of take too long. Like, there's way too much padding going on with them. If I ever see an enemy like the tank or the caterpillar in the open zone, my first instinct is to just run away. I want nothing to do with it, and I will do anything to not engage with it whatsoever. So that is not a good sign for the combat. Enemies like Spider throw you into these super long skydiving sections. Fortress is another long grind rail section. The Shark, oh my goodness, don't get me started on the Shark. That is like one of the worst bosses in the game. Also, let's talk about how they fling you into a little cutscene every time they pop up on the screen. That is one of the most annoying things that's ever been done to me in a game, because it happens so many times. So yeah, if we're talking about combat as a whole, it's not the simplicity that bothers me so much, it's probably these Guardian fights. But being the fan of Frontiers that I am, I'm here to once again play the other side of the argument, and that is player input and player freedom. There's a lot of fun that you can create when you're fighting these Guardians. For example, the game wants me to do this. It wants me to go up this way. The game wants me to attack the top of Ashura, and then I get flung off. What if instead of playing the way Sonic Team designed it, I decide to have my own fun? Let's say I pop a spin dash real quick, hop on this grind rail, do a little rail launch right onto Ashura, and I found another fun and engaging way to do that. And instead of falling to the ground, I exploit the game's physics, and then I come up here and take him out. That is a lot more fun than sometimes engaging with the padding that the game allows for. Uh-oh, the squid has appeared. How does Sonic Team want me to fight squid? They want me to sit here and run on this automated section and kind of play the Starlight Carnival Sonic level. What if instead of doing the 40-second automated section that's really boring to chase down squid, I actually use some Sonic level design to try and chase him down? Maybe I'll actually do some platforming to add some style and flair to my boss battle. So I'll come up here, I'll do a nice little well-timed spin dash and try to fly all the way over to squid. Am I gonna make it? Yes, I am. There are certainly a ton of different ways we can go about doing this, but the point is, a lot of the fun in this game comes from creating it yourself. What if Sonic Team designed it where that creativity was built into the actual game design? It's like, can we get way more of what I did with Ashura and Squid and way less? Actually, let's make it 0 of what you're doing on this Guardian. This is like one of my least favorite in the game. I actually can kind of appreciate the simplicity of it, because it's something that you don't necessarily have to spend too much time doing if you don't want to have to do it. It's probably at its best when you have full 360 control over the character when you're fighting bosses like Ninja, as opposed to those other bosses that have soft locks. But I think one big complaint of the game a lot of people have is combat, so if they can make it better in the next one, then by all means, let's do it. I think the next thing for sure that they should do is make sure to improve the linear stage experience. In Sonic Frontiers, the linear stages are called cyberspace. These are the linear stages that kind of break up the pace of the open world. Similar to the shrines in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the cyberspace stages serve as that equivalent for Sonic Frontiers. At its core fundamental level, cyberspace is traditional Sonic gameplay. Hot take, I kind of like cyberspace in this game. I think Sonic has a really good moveset with his bounce abilities and his air dash, so it creates for a lot of fun and engaging platform, at least from my perspective. The biggest issue that plagues cyberspace, though, is the fact that 1, they are reusing levels from previous games, 2, the levels can be kind of short, and 3, the controls are not as smooth as the open zone. In cyberspace, Sonic's turning radius has been dramatically slowed down, so it feels like he's turning like a tank, which wouldn't be a problem if the level was properly designed around it, but the problem is, a lot of these levels are reused from Sonic Generations and Sonic Unleashed, 2 games that feature a drift mechanic. Since the levels in this game aren't completely original, that means a lot of them aren't built around Sonic's moveset, so the clunky controls can kind of feel like they get in the way, especially when you have to jump and change directions. It seems though that Sonic Team definitely has the message for how to handle these linear stages in this adventure boost hybrid type control scheme, which is what I consider Frontiers and Shadow Generations to be. What's crazy about this game is, yeah, the controls and physics are slightly tweaked and it's a little bit tighter, but for the most part, they are kind of the same. The difference between this game and Frontiers is that the levels are actually original and they're designed around Shadow's moveset. You're not going to really feel those tanky controls when you're trying to turn because the levels are very linear. They've created a lot of fun stages in the same exact engine that Sonic Frontiers is running on in Shadow Generation, so I feel like for the next Sonic game, I want cyberspace or some form of linear traditional stages to return. I feel like it's an absolute necessity for the open zone, and it makes the game feel like a true, unique Sonic game. So I want them to bring it back, but I want them to feel good to play. I also want the stages to be ambitious. I want them to be long. I don't want them to be like 30 seconds. So bring back cyberspace, or whatever you want to call it in the next game. Make every single level that you put in the game a real, true, full level like in Shadow, and let's run it back back, but simply improve upon what you did in the first game. I'm an absolute sucker for platformer games that control really well. It's the reason why Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 are one of my favorite games of all time. It's the reason why I like Super Mario Odyssey. It's really one of the big reasons why I love Sonic Frontiers so much. Makes Sonic feel good to control in these stages. Like, if you can make it even better than Shadow Generations, then go for it. But that's what I'm looking for in the sequel to Sonic Frontiers. Oh yeah, and by the way, don't make Sonic control differently in the open zone in cyberspace, especially if he controls better in the open zone. The next thing I would like to see in Sonic Frontiers 2, or whatever they call the next open zone game is a little bit more variety between the open zones. In Sonic Frontiers, it's kind of like this barren wasteland island. What if instead of getting these like generic terrains and landscapes, we got something that was a little bit more in line with Sonic? It doesn't necessarily have to be Green Hill, but what if the next open zone game, Angel Island, was featured as one of the open zones? Maybe the whole game takes place on Angel Island. What if we had like a Station Square open zone with like a city or something like that? What I'm trying to say here is that we need more variety with the landscapes. Something to make each island or level theme feel unique from the one previously. I mean, there's literally 3 Kronos Islands in the game. Chaos Island is kind of just like this volcano area with nothing going on, and then Ares Island is just like the generic desert. Sonic the Hedgehog has this extremely iconic art style for the series, so if they were able to return to previous locations or even new locations with just a more distinct art style, that I think would be very good. Last but not least, I think one of the biggest things that Sonic Frontiers 2 needs is an incredible amount of polish. And that doesn't just start with the gameplay. It starts with really almost everything. Let's start with the cutscenes of the game. Some of them are okay, but there's a lot of them that are just the characters standing around talking with little to no movement. This does not really scream AAA or super high quality. Even the cutscenes where they're actually moving around don't really look that great either, but it seems like this is going to be corrected, as Shadow Generations has had incredible animation and cutscenes, and it honestly looks night and day compared to Sonic Frontiers. And this is just a side project, so imagine what Sonic Team can do with a little more budget, time, resources, and effort in a AAA game. And a lot of that could also be applied to the in-game animations as well. He's still using the same running motions that he used from Sonic Forces. They could probably touch up on the smoothness of the physics as well. Like, look what happens when you try to run on this rock. Like, it just looks so ugly. Look at that. Like, for example, there's a cliff right here, and if Sonic boosts off of it, he kind of just, like, sticks to the terrain. It's just kind of weird. It doesn't look good. There's unscalable terrain, and now, like, I don't even know what's going on with my character right now. Like, we all know that the game has some polish issues. While there's still a lot of fun to be had, if they can make it look even smoother, that would be good. That could even apply to the model as well. Like, maybe we can have a more stylized Sonic. It feels like we've been using kind of the same thing for the last 20 years, and that polish also applies to the story. Now, this is probably one of the most ambitious Sonic stories in a long time, probably since Sonic Unleashed, and I really appreciate what they did. I really like Ian Flynn's writing in the game. The characters, for the first time in a really long time, don't feel like parodies of themselves. Sonic actually feels a lot closer to the Sonic that I became a fan of when I was younger. But the problem with the story is, I think it was a little rushed and vague. Like, it feels like they're building up to something grand, and then you get to the final island, and it's like, oh, like, this is where they ran out of budget and time. And it really slaps you in the face at the end when you fight the moon with the shooting minigame. Obviously, Final Horizons fixed that, but had the game had proper polish and time, we wouldn't have this situation where we need a patch to fix the actual story of the game. In the Sonic Frontiers sequel, I still want them to go back to those more ambitious stories. I like what they did with Frontiers, but I think they could have done even better, because they definitely did a great job with the spectacle. And it's a lot more in line with the Sonic stories that I like, so keep going and bring something like this back. Just make it even better and give them the time that they need. Oh yeah, and it goes without saying, I guess this falls under the polish category. With the linear stages, they cannot be as janky as cyberspace. We talked about this earlier, but it definitely still falls under the polish category. While air controls in the game are relatively solid, especially in a linear fashion, when you're jumping, changing directions is very slow. Sonic has to do a full 360 motion when he jumps, so it really creates a lot of issues when you're platforming. So I think this is something that they can definitely improve. It doesn't really seem like it got much better in Shadow, so I don't know how it will improve in the next Sonic game. When I play a game like Sonic Adventure, the air controls feel a lot better when moving in that 360 motion. It also goes without saying, and I hope that because we're in the Nintendo Switch 2 era, we won't have this problem anymore, but they need to fix the pop-in. The pop-in for Sonic Frontiers is quite frankly embarrassing for a AAA game in the year that it was released, 2022, basically 2023. So this is what the sequel to Sonic Frontiers needs. Despite the fact that it's one of my favorite 3D Sonic games ever, the unfortunate reality is that it received a 7 out of 10. So I think if we implement some of these ideas and make some tweaks and improvements, the sequel can widely be seen amongst the general community as like an 8.5 or a 9 out of 10. So who had a better 2024 than Shadow the Hedgehog? It's officially been 1 year since the Fearless Year of Shadow campaign kicked off, and the marketing goals were pretty simple, and that was to simply revive Shadow the the Hedgehog and focus all projects around him. And it all culminated with the grand finale of Sonic Movie 3, which features Shadow on the big screen, resulting with the highest rated video game film of all time. Oh yeah, and by the way, in addition to that, we also got a 3D Sonic game that was the highest rated since Sonic Adventure 2 with Sonic and Shadow Generations. For today's discussion, let's hone in on that game for a second. The biggest thing, at least for me, when it came to Sonic and Shadow Generations was that we were going to get some new updated lore to the whole Project Shadow origin story. To be clear, I think this is the greatest story that Sonic has ever told, so it only makes sense that they would expand upon this, especially in a year focused around Shadow the Hedgehog as a character. His backstory and his upbringing is central to his appeal in a lot of ways. Shadow the Hedgehog is not only the coolest character, but his story is very powerful. It's about trauma, it's about dealing with grief, it's about learning how to move on. So it's natural that a lot of people are gravitated to this because it's something that's relatable and more in-depth than anything we've ever seen. So with Sonic and Shadow Generations, what has changed about his story? Well, not really that much. However, there are some details that have been added and updated, and perhaps some retcons seem to have been made, but does it really matter? Well, let's get into it. So our story dates back to when Sonic and Shadow Generations originally leaked, and some of the pre-order bonuses had leaked out. First things first, we saw a Sonic Adventure Dreamcast skin, which is a really big deal because a lot of people love that model, obviously. But also, Gerald's Robotnik journal detailing Shadow's creation is the thing that caught everyone's attention. Not only did this indicate that we were getting additional Project Shadow lore, when you zoomed in really close on the journal, you saw Angel Island as well as the Mystic Ruins, which got a lot of people thinking. Could it finally be true, the fan theory about the mural on Angel Island depicting Supersonic actually leading towards the creation of Shadow being true? As you can tell, there was just certainly a lot of hype about potentially what could be discovered in Gerald Robotnik's journal. Well, today's discussion centers around things that were found there, in addition to previous Sonic character bios and how potentially a retcon involving Maria's story may have occurred. Because fast forward a couple of months later and the game came out and we were finally able to go to the collection room and access Gerald's journal. The journal of Gerald Robotnik is a source for a lot of cool information, one of which is the formal introduction to Professor Tori, the mysterious purple-haired professor that was haunting Sonic fans for years. Now that she's finally been revealed, it seems like Sonic and Shadow Generations was officially her introduction to the Sonic universe. And also, she has a connection to G.U.N, with Tori in particular claiming that she would have very much liked to have a greater insight into Gerald and Maria's lives. We also got a little bit more history of the Robotnik family tree, involving Eggman's father as well as Maria's father, and the schism that Project Shadow caused between their family. So now on to Maria's retcons. So it's important to understand the context of Maria as a character. So she spent most of her life on Space Colony Ark. The reason why she was there was because she had a terminal illness that nobody knew how to treat. The only person who would attempt to do such is Professor Gerald Robotnik, the world's greatest scientist. The reason why he agreed to work on Project Shadow, which ultimately led to the creation of Shadow the Hedgehog, was in order to find a cure for her. At the same time, though, the government who was funding the project was really looking for the creation of weapons of mass destruction. While all this was happening and all the research was going on, you had incidents such as the Gizoid causing a rampage on the Ark, Gerald creating blood pacts with a bunch of aliens in order to create Shadow the Hedgehog, and then you had the creation of things like the Biolizard, which also caused another accident on the Ark as well. It's safe to say that research probably wasn't going the way the government had initially planned. So you're the government, you hear all this crazy stuff going on up there in the Ark. By the way, you're funding it. At this point, it's time to go up there and shut this whole thing down. The government raids the Ark, they end up killing Maria, and her dream of seeing the Earth is never fulfilled. An early character bio of Maria Robotnik says this: of frail appearance but full of life. Maria is the granddaughter of Professor Gerald and Dr. Robotnik's cousin. She's always been the apple of Professor Gerald's eye. She was born and raised on the Space Colony Ark along with Shadow, who she considers a brother to her. She's very eager to visit Earth due to her always being limited to observing it with great interest from the loneliness of the colony. To improve her health, the professor started the research for the ultimate life form, but the tragic events that changed the space colony's destiny cost him her life. Her death triggered Gerald's insanity and his thirst for revenge. So for a lot of people, it feels like Maria is a character who never actually went to Earth, and personally, that was something I was always of the belief of. Take a look at this dialogue from Sonic Adventure 2.
Shadow, what do you think it's like on Earth?
The professor said his life's work was dedicated to all of those who live down there. He once told that the reason for his existence was making people happy through the power of science.
Shadow.
Maria, I just don't know anything anymore. I often wonder why I was created, what my purpose is for being here. Maybe if I go down there, I will find the answers.
So I'm definitely not the only one, but the way I interpreted that scene is that, yeah, she's never been to Earth before, and there's a lot of other Sonic fans that also feel the same way. Fast forward to some of the events, cutscenes, and dialogue from Sonic and Shadow Generations, as well as Professor Gerald's journal, we gain some additional insight to Maria's true upbringing. In the second entry of Gerald Robotnik's journal, after he introduces his sons, he talks about how his granddaughter Maria was born, and everything he does from this day forward will be for her. She will be his legacy. In a lot of ways, that is true. A couple of entries later, we get additional insight on Maria's life, and it's finally been confirmed that Maria was not born on the Ark like people had previously thought. She has actually been to Earth before. He also talks about her diagnosis. It says, "It has been a trying time, to say the least. Maria was diagnosed with neuroimmunodeficiency syndrome. There is no cure yet. I pulled some strings and had her brought aboard the Ark for treatment and assessment. The low-gravity environment should keep her symptoms manageable. Her family has been less than enthusiastic with my decision. Despite everything, she remains the most positive person in the room. Most of the staff here left their families back on Earth, so I worried she'd feel lonely. Instead, she's become the adoptive daughter of every researcher on the Ark. Moreover, she's become like a big sister to little Abraham Tower, the Ark's happy little accident over the last few years." He then goes on to talk about how he's racing to find a cure for her. So what's interesting about all this is that Abraham Tower, aka the Gun Commander, actually was born on the Ark, so it's not really necessarily out of the realm of possibility that that could happen, but it does turn out to be the case that Maria is not from the Ark. So this has led to a lot of confusion among Sonic fans. A lot of people are saying that, oh, this is actually a retcon because Maria was said to have been born on the Ark. So is it a retcon? Is it true? Well, let's get some further context from Gerald's journal, and then, of course, get to the final verdict. So the next entry in the journal says, "Maria is growing into a lovely young woman. It breaks my heart that someone as bright and energetic as her is diminished by disease. There are no visible effects, and I've caught my fellow researchers muttering to each other, debating her illness. It is infuriating. I find all my measure and restraint vanishes when she's slighted. And yet she remains an unended front of positivity, even on her worst days. When fear and pain take hold, she tells me she dreams for the day when she can return home. She has total faith in me and that Project Shadow will cure her. Her family back on Earth has no such faith. It has been so long, some of the researchers actually think she was born here. Her family either wants her better or wants her home. I can do neither. Somehow, their scorn is harsher than the government or military's increasing pressure for more weapons research." Maria's character bio in Sonic and Shadow Generations also further drives home this point. It says, "Maria is the granddaughter of Professor Gerald and cousin to Dr. Eggman. She's plagued by chronic illness, but that doesn't diminish her courage and loving heart. She was sent to the Ark for treatment and she grew up alongside Shadow. She dreamed of one day being cured and returning to the Earth that she loved and missed so much. However, she was lost to a tragedy and now Shadow carries on her wish for the world." It's also important to note that we do get more context about Maria's life back on Earth because in dialogue in the games, he says to Shadow, "Before I got sick, I went with my family to Spagonia. The food there was amazing." Maria also talks more about her family and says, "I miss my family and I miss my baby sister most of all." So there is a Maria Robotnik sister out there, and I don't think that they introduced that to us for no reason. The implication that potentially there's a future Sonic plot out there that features a long-lost cousin of Dr. Robotnik, a relative to Maria, and how this could potentially all tie in together with Shadow the Hedgehog would be extremely interesting, and I would love to see them further explore this in the future. Back to the task at hand. Are Sonic fans correct? Is Maria's new backstory from Sonic and Shadow Generations a retcon? I think there are definitely some legitimate ways to explain this. One of which being the dialogue in the journal that says that Maria has been in the Ark so long, a lot of people think that she was born there. I feel like this kind of addresses some of the inconsistent dialogue from SA2 that makes it seem like she never visited the Earth, and that's probably why they slipped that in there. Here's another reason. I've done some digging in old Sonic game manuals, and here's Shadow 05. All it says about Maria is that she is the professor's granddaughter, and 50 years ago, his top secret government project was to create the ultimate life form, and as a result, Maria was caught in the crossfire of the conspiracy. They don't necessarily state that she was born on the Ark. I also looked at the manual for Sonic Adventure 2, and all it says is that Maria Robotnik is a mysterious girl that exists in the memory of Shadow. Maria is the granddaughter of Professor Gerald and a cousin of Dr. Eggman. It does not say necessarily anything about her previously living on Earth or being born on the Ark, despite the dialogue in the game, which we'll get to in a second. The Sonic Adventure 2 battle GameCube manual also has nothing to say about where Maria was born either. So the two previous dialogues that we pointed to before, the cutscene in SA2 as well as that other translated manual that I found, I think the most plausible explanation for all this is that it can be chalked up to bad localization. The scene where Maria is asking Shadow what the Earth is like on the Ark, allegedly in the original Japanese script, something more akin to her asking Shadow what his opinion of the Earth is. So you could argue that the localization on the English script wasn't as good. So yes, it's definitely true that while growing up, I always thought Maria never visited Earth. I'm kind of fine with this explanation. I think it works. But on some level, the original thought that Maria was born on the Ark and she never got to see the Earth makes her story that much more tragic in a way, because Shadow's role is to protect the planet that Maria loves so much. And while he got to experience Earth and all of the great things about it, Maria never never got to do the same. He has to watch over a world that Maria never got to see. So what do you think about all this? What was your original opinion on Maria's story? Do you like the new story? Do you think it's a retcon? Do you like the new changes? Let me know what Sonic lore topics you'd like me to cover next. The console wars. Get used to not hearing this term anymore in the future. While at one point it seemed like a never-ending arms race, but with news and rumors about Xbox leaving the industry, you can only wonder what the industry will look like in the future, especially when you think about Nintendo Switch 2's rocky reveal. Although it feels like their place in the console industry is etched in stone. Rather than trying to out Xbox and PlayStation, they decided to go their own route, which is leverage their world-class IPs and not focus on this never-ending race for graphical fidelity. But as you know, things can't stay the same way forever. Things can change really fast. Think about Sega, which at one point was one of the top competitors within the industry, and just within 10 years became a third-party publisher. Which brings us back to Sonic the Hedgehog. Which generation of consoles featured the best Sonic games by group? Well, let's rank them all. Of course, Sonic the Hedgehog has been around for nearly 35 years, so he's been around for most of the console generations. The legendary story of Sonic the Hedgehog begins on the 4th generation of consoles, and that starts with the Sega Genesis. The two most notable consoles and competitors of the time were Sega and Nintendo, Sonic vs. Mario. Whether you love the classic Sonic games or hate the classic Sonic games because opinions vary and shift over the years, this is where everything started, and there is a wide sentiment amongst the gaming community that the classic Sonic games, the 2D platformers, are in fact the best in the series, and there's some fans that go as far as to say that Sonic was never good after these games released. Of course, I wouldn't be here making videos for you all if that was actually the case, because I happen to like the 3D Sonic games. That's just some opinion that's out there amongst some pockets of the gaming community. The first thing that you're greeted with when you fire up this game is the iconic Green Hill Zone, and you know that this game is influential because much to the dismay of Sonic fans, it's been featured in nearly every single Sonic game since. I must admit, in the current day and age, 2025, I'm not really much of a Sonic 1 enjoyer, but there's no denying that at the time in 1991, this was absolutely a revolutionary game. It took what we knew about platformer games, which was to run and jump on platforms, and kind of pushed it to a new level. What if satisfyingly building up and maintaining speed through skill, while platforming of course, was the name of the game, and replaying the levels in order to find the best routes. The best players will always have the most optimal route. Plus, you also had really cool things such as rolling physics, and you have yourself a very simple yet addicting gameplay loop. What if we took that gameplay loop and made it even better in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and also gave him an iconic sidekick, Tails? That's pretty much what happened, because Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is actually my favorite classic Sonic game, and they took the level design and the philosophy of Sonic 1 and made it even faster and arguably more replayable, and you give Sonic a brand new ability called the Spin Dash, which is also extremely influential as it's basically one of his main attacks that has been seen throughout the series since. The game also introduced a totally original character in Super Sonic that was not influenced from anywhere else. It took speed, level design, and spectacle to a whole new level. In my opinion, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is better than 1 in almost every single way. Not a bad start for the blue guy. The third Sonic the Hedgehog game is not Sonic 3, it's actually Sonic CD. This game released in 1993, and the opening cutscene of this game truly defines what classic Sonic really is all about. The level design and philosophy of this game is actually much different than Sonic 2, which is about high speed and pace. This one is more so about exploration, and I would say vertical up and down platforming and level design. There are a lot of people that love Sonic CD, and I don't think it's a bad game, although I'm just more of a Sonic 2 kind of guy. One of the main gimmicks of this game is the time travel mechanic, which requires you to go back into the past or the future in order to alter the direction of time. The highlight of this game is obviously the introduction of one of Sonic's greatest rivals, which is Metal Sonic, as well as Amy Rose, two characters that will become staples in the series. Overall, it's a pretty solid title, but the true pinnacle of this generation has to be Sonic 3 and Knuckles. In a lot of ways, Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles are technically considered separate titles, but these days, most people consider them to be one game. The original Sonic the Hedgehog 3 released in February of 1994, while Sonic and Knuckles, a direct continuation, was released 8 months later in October of 1994. Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles were supposed to actually be one singular game, but it was too big to fit on one cartridge, so they introduced a lock-on technology, which when combined, you get the full game. So basically 2 separate releases for part 1 and part 2 of the same game. This game was certainly the most ambitious Sonic game to date. It featured 14 different zones, an amazing soundtrack, level-to-level cutscenes that bridged the story together, and by the way, despite being a 16-bit game with no voice acting, there is a real story for this game. And most importantly, 3 playable characters, which greatly expanded the level design because now you have separate routes for different playstyles. That made Sonic 3 and Knuckles infinitely replayable. This is widely considered amongst many people one of the greatest 2D platformers of all time. This is also one of the few Sonic games where you could say, hey, I think this game is actually better than its Mario counterpart, and people wouldn't look at you like you're crazy. Also, another great feature of this game was the introduction of power-ups. So now you have even more gameplay gimmicks to add to the game, and it just feels like the Sonic series was getting better and better with each release. So while most of what Sega has touched up until this point has been fire, there was Sonic Spinball, which ironically is the first Sonic spin-off game, and it wasn't even developed by Sonic Team, so I guess you could cut them some slack. And this game was certainly a step down in quality as opposed to the mainline 2D platformers, so it wasn't all bangers during this era. I always hated this game and never got very far in it, and I think the controls are clunky, the physics are clunky, but I don't think that this game is enough to drag down an era of all-time classics that influenced a generation and sparked the birth of an iconic franchise. We also can't forget about Knuckles Chaotix, which was released during the 4th generation of consoles, although it's trying to be a 5th generation game because Sega made use of the 32X add-on to the Genesis to make it a 32-bit processing game. You'll see the best examples of this during the 3D special stages. There's definitely some cool gimmicks and concepts explored in Knuckles Chaotix, but a lot of times the partner system in the game can be seen as a frustrating gimmick that gets in the way of what the game is trying to do, which is be a competent classic Sonic game, which is why the game wasn't received all that positive compared to some of the other classics. Oh yeah, Sonic 3D Blast was also released for the Sega Genesis, but I honestly consider this more of a Sega Saturn title, which would fall under the 5th generation category. As a Genesis game, I guess it's not the worst. Like, yeah, you do kind of have to consider the time period in which this game released and what other games were available, but even this game was starting to feel a little dated, and I also just don't like it. So with that being said, where does the 4th generation fall on the tier list? I think it safely and unequivocally goes in the S tier. Imagine getting 4, I mean technically 5 mainline bangers in the same generation in a span of like 3.5 years. In addition to that, the Sega Genesis was a formidable competitor to the Nintendo SNES and took a huge chunk of its market share, so that is very admirable. That just doesn't happen without the classic Sonic games released on the system, so their impact proportionate to all of the other eras cannot be understated. You have a couple of flops, but they are not enough to drag this anywhere out of the S tier. So Sega is absolutely cooking. They put out a generation-defining console. Sonic is doing better than ever. So how do they follow it up? Well, enter the Sega Saturn, which was Sega's leap into the 5th generation. The Sega Saturn was technically impressive. Unfortunately, due to the way that it was designed with 2 32-bit processors, it was very difficult for developers to create games for the system. Unfortunately, at the time, it wasn't just Nintendo that was Sega's competition. As a matter of fact, Nintendo had competition as well, and that's because Sony released the PlayStation 1, one of the best-selling consoles of all time. To be honest, it took Nintendo a couple of generations to catch up to Sony and the PlayStation because they were getting routinely outsold for a couple generations after that, as far as home consoles go. The Sega Saturn didn't necessarily sell terribly, but it did get outsold by the PlayStation like 11-1, and most of the sales came in Japan. So take a look at the Sega Saturn's performance, and now take a guess as to how Sonic performed during this era. So there weren't many games to speak of during this era. One of them was Sonic R, which is a spin-off racing game. Now, I personally love this game and I have a lot of fondness for it, but the controls of this game are very clunky at best. There really isn't that much content in the game. While it has a very unique atmosphere and charm to it, like I love the OST of this game, I like that it's fully in 3D, I like that there's exploration aspects. The Sonic characters are actually racing on foot, like it actually kind of feels like a Sonic game. The characters have their actual abilities that they possess in the series. The game had relatively mixed reviews, which is a far cry from what Sonic was just a couple of years ago. When you hear the phrase that Sonic had a rough transition to 3D, games like this were very much a part of that. During the Sega Saturn era, there really was no true 3D Sonic platformers developed. And that's because during this era, the OG Sonic team was working on Nights into Dreams. Another game that was available for the Sega Saturn at the time was Sonic 3D Blast, which also was available on the Sega Genesis. And they call this a 3D game, but it's really not. This game was different than its Genesis counterpart as the graphics were slightly improved. The 3D blasting, if you will, occurs in the special stages, as these are different. You also had these cutscenes that were featured in the Sega Saturn version also. As far as the gameplay of this game goes, I'm definitely not a fan because it's not a traditional Sonic game. It's more so like a tedious fetch quest game. You have to look around the map to find enemies to kill to free the flickies, and if you get all 5 flickies, you can advance to the next portion of the stage. It's certainly a much different experience than the 2D platformers from the Sonic era, as that gameplay style wasn't really translated into true 3D until the Sonic Adventure series. You want to like this game, like it's got a little bit of charm to it, it's got a nice OST, but then it's like you play the first level and then you're kind of over it. The isometric top-down view just didn't really work. Like there's some sections in the game that actually requires you to platform, and it's just like very hard to gauge where Sonic is actually jumping. This was another Sonic Sonic game that once again got mixed reception during this era and was just simply not on par with the quality of the original 2D platformers in the series. Like I said, as a standalone Sega Genesis game that has nothing to do with Sonic, I guess I could see why some people might think the game's okay for like maybe 1991 or 1992 standards, but this is 1996. This is the same year that Super Mario 64 came out. Granted, the 64 was a much more powerful system, but Sonic was falling behind. So that brings us to the game that comes after Mario 64, and that is Sonic Jam, which was the only Sonic Team game developed during the Sega Saturn era. And basically what we got was a tech demo in the overworld with a bunch of like mini challenges that Sonic could complete. Granted, this would serve as inspiration for future titles like Sonic Adventure as well as Sonic Frontiers, but this was just a small portion of Sonic Jam. A majority of what the game was essentially ports of Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles. It also had the museum with a bunch of artwork and celebration of Sonic's history, so I wouldn't even necessarily consider this like a full-blown original Sonic release. So the 5th generation of consoles was definitely the beginning of the end for Sega. There was not a single full-blown original Sonic Team release. I honestly think that you have to put it in the F tier. I like Sonic R, it's not a bad game, but this truly is the weakest generation in the history of Sonic, I think. Which brings us to the legendary 6th generation of consoles, which featured the Sega Dreamcast to kick off the era, the Sony PS2, Nintendo GameCube, and Microsoft's first ever console, the Xbox. You know, the 6th generation was pretty long when Sega started it, and then mid-generation ended up bowing out of manufacturing consoles and producing games for the Xbox, GameCube, and PS2. So the 6th generation starts off with the Sega Dreamcast, and we get the best, in my opinion, Sonic game of all time, Sonic Adventure 1. Sonic Team hasn't produced a mainline Sonic game in nearly 4 years, so how do they respond? They truly overhaul the franchise and take that next-gen lead. Not only has the hardware improved, but we got a brand new design for Sonic the Hedgehog himself. His eyes are now green, his quills and his limbs are longer. He has this more edgy design. This guy is the epitome of cool. The first true 3D mainline platformer for Sonic is one of the most ambitious in the entire series. We have animated cutscenes that certainly didn't age poorly. We have expansive 3D levels to explore with many branching paths and open level design. We have the adventure field, which is a hub world which truly bridges the entire story together. 6 playable characters, intertwining stories between the 6 playable characters, which is one of the most immersive parts of the game, and a focus on story and narrative, something that separated Sonic from his contemporaries at the time, and honestly to this day. There's certainly some arguments to be made that some of the other gameplay styles aren't as good, but the game is called Sonic Adventure, and when it comes to the Sonic gameplay, it's probably the best that it's ever been in the series in terms of the controls. I'd say without a doubt, controlling Sonic in this game is much better than controlling Mario in Super Mario 64. Argue with a wall if you disagree. Maybe I'm biased, but it's probably the best start to any Sonic era. So how do they follow up this masterpiece? Well, they released Sonic Shuffle. What was Sonic Shuffle? Well, it's basically Mario Party, but worse. It's essentially a board game. You take turns running around the map, and then you play some mini games to duke it out. Interestingly enough, it was actually developed by the same Mario Party developers, so you would think that they captured a little bit of the same magic. I mean, the mini games aren't bad, but I really don't like the actual board game play. And overall, it got pretty mediocre reviews, so I think the majority of people share the same sentiment. I'm sure there's some truthers out there, but I am not one of those people. And then we finish off Sonic on the Dreamcast with the most famous Sonic game of all time, Sonic Adventure 2. This game is, without a doubt, the most influential post-Genesis game in the entire Sonic franchise. I think at this point, it's an objective fact. The big blockbuster Hollywood film, Sonic Movie 3, quite literally did an adaptation of this game, and it's no surprise that it was the most successful in the entire Sonic movie franchise. The Dreamcast version of Sonic Adventure 2 to this day is still the highest rated 3D Sonic game ever. The game introduced Shadow the Hedgehog, the second most popular character of all time in the franchise. Sonic Adventure 2 also introduced rail grinding into the series. I mean, talk about a staple. This has been in every Sonic game, whether it's Boost, Adventure, or everything in between since. It took Sonic Adventure 1 and made it a lot more streamlined and linear. It had a greater focus on narrative and probably to this day told the greatest Sonic story ever. They took the Chow Garden and made it better. They gave Sonic a couple of extra abilities, and you could certainly say certain aspects of this game have not aged as well, but at the time, you just had to be there for when this game was out. It truly was an awesome experience. Shortly after this game released, Sega left the console manufacturing industry, and this could have been the last time we ever saw Sonic.
Sayonara, Shadow the Hedgehog.
He certainly went out with a bang. That is until... So technically Technically, Sonic did already make the leap to Nintendo GameCube because Sonic Adventure 2 Battle was actually ported over to the GameCube and it came out not too long after the Dreamcast version. They also put Sonic Adventure on the GameCube with Sonic Adventure DX, and how could anyone forget Sonic Mega Collection? This game was your standard Sonic collection. It packaged a lot of the old classic Sonic games, although not all of them. It had a bunch of cool artwork and just general things from Sonic's history, and it truly was the perfect way to introduce these Nintendo kids who have never played Sonic before into the world and history of Sonic the Hedgehog. A perfect game collection for a near perfect era. But back to Sonic Heroes, my first ever Sonic game and one that I truly have a lot of fondness for. However, this game is pretty divisive when you look at it through a modern lens. As far as the reviews go for this game, it's a 72 on Metacritic and a 7.7 amongst the fans, so if you put that together, it's like a 7.5, let's call it. Brand new mainline 3D Sonic platformers were back, and they weren't just on Sega hardware. Now it's on Nintendo, GameCube, and PlayStation 2. Sonic Heroes was the first multi-platform game developed for all three of the major consoles at the time. A trend that would obviously continue to this day with the occasional exclusive here and there. What Sonic Heroes was trying to do was bring Sonic a little bit more back to his roots. It's essentially one core playstyle throughout the entire game. While there's 3 different playable characters per team, you can only control one of them at a time, and you're playing with all 3 simultaneously. The team-based mechanic was the game's featuring gimmick, and the reason why some people either love or hate this game is because it's a little bit unpolished. Controls are a little slippery. The rail grinding's kind of janky. There's some weird gimmicks like the pinball stages, and to truly beat the game, you have to play it from start to finish 4 separate times. And Team Chaotix just exists. The game's not perfect, but I have a lot of love for it. This game also is one of the highest selling 3D Sonic games ever, so you can definitely say that it was a success for the franchise. A year after Sonic Heroes, Sega released yet another classic Sonic compilation with the Sonic Gems collection. This was like the weird, trippier version of the Sonic Mega collection with less main titles. It had Sonic CD, Sonic the Fighters, and Sonic R. What's interesting about this release, though, is that this was the first time that Sonic the Fighters was available on home consoles as opposed to arcade machines. So it certainly was a compelling collection, and I guess all of the main games do feature Metal Sonic, who is on the cover. So maybe that was the angle. So overall, it's kind of weird that they released 2 separate classic compilations in the same era. But hey, I guess they made a lot of money, so I guess it makes sense on their end. Of the 2 Sonic compilations that released during the 6th generation, Gems Collection was definitely seen as the worst of the 2. I feel like up until this point, it was a perfect time to be a Sonic fan. While this is mainly focusing on the home console release for this section of the series, the marketing campaign used to describe years like 2003 and 2004 were the year of Sonic. We got a full-blown Sonic animated series with Sonic X. We got a ton of awesome Sonic handheld releases, in particular Sonic Advance 1, 2, and 3, and they were absolutely pumping out game after game. I think the real quote-unquote beginning of the end, if you will, for the Sonic franchise probably starts with Shadow the Hedgehog 2005. As far as the way this game plays, it's pretty similar to Sonic Heroes. You have the same character models, you have the same slippery controls. It does in a lot of ways feel like a nice streamlined continuation of the Sonic Adventure plotline. And growing up, I did think this game was awesome. I mean, Sega's mindset was just, what if we gave Sonic the Hedgehog a gun? I went back and replayed this game all these years later, and then I kind of realized, like, oh, the game that I used to love actually kind of sucks. There's a lot of interesting ideas that it pulls off, but in a lot of ways, it's just not properly executed and just has a lot of game padding. The idea that there's multiple different choices that you can have to affect the outcome of the story is pretty cool. The problem is that in execution, it just doesn't really work, and the plot doesn't really make that much sense. Doing tedious little checklist missions in a Sonic game just doesn't really seem like the best way to go about it. You'll spend the entire level looking for 35 different aliens, and if you miss one, you have to start all the way over from the beginning and search every nook and cranny in order to complete the mission. Instead of high-speed platforming and replaying a level over and over to find the best routes, it really slows down this game and just becomes extremely frustrating. I think this game also kind of started the death of Shadow's character. I feel like he's mischaracterized in this game frequently. The narrative about Shadow the Hedgehog, especially over like the last 5 to 6 years, that, oh, he's just this edgelord, there's no depth to his character. All those bad tropes can easily be traced back to this game and this game alone. The Shadow I know is from Sonic Adventure 2 and Sonic Heroes and Sonic 06, even though it came after. There's some fun to be had if you do like a neutral campaign and just go through the levels from start to finish like an actual Sonic game. But again, you're gonna have to replay the game at least 10 different times, and you're gonna have to do all the tedious missions. So a full-blown playthrough of this game from start to finish with all 10 endings and the Super Shadow boss fight is just not a great total experience. To put this into perspective, Shadow the Hedgehog has a 51 on Metacritic, and Sonic 06, the most infamous Sonic game in the entire franchise, has a 46, so it's not even that far off. So the nostalgia goggles unfortunately need to be taken off, and we have to chalk up Shadow the Hedgehog as a net negative for the Sonic franchise at the time. There's one final game from the 6th generation, and that is another all-time banger. And that, of course, would be Sonic Riders, one of the most iconic Sonic games of all time. This was an original Sonic game released back in 2006, and this wasn't your traditional mascot platformer racer party game. For me personally, I feel like you'll never be able to out Mario Kart, so I feel like the best value proposition for a racing game would be something that tries to do its own thing and has something that Mario Kart doesn't have, and that's exactly what Sonic Riders was. This game game just radiated the energy that the Sonic series carried throughout this era. Instead of driving around in cars, the main vehicle for transportation in this game is the Extreme Gear, which are these high-tech hoverboards. What this game featured, though, was a unique story mode, an entirely new way to attack racing games in the sense that you had a resource management system that included tricks in order to make sure that you stay on your hoverboard. And while yes, looking back on this game, there's certainly some jank and polish that's missing, and at times it feels like it can be a little bit frustrating, but if you can get past some of the rough edges of this game, mastering the mechanics is extremely satisfying. Perhaps the game was a little bit ahead of its time as it received only a 59 on Metacritic, but ultimately got an 8 out of 10 user score, so people really did like this game, but maybe the impact amongst the general audience wasn't as felt. But amongst Sonic fans specifically, it's absolutely beloved. I mean, you still see it in the series to this day in some of the mobile games as well as the comics, and the Extreme Gear is also going to be featured in the newest Sonic racing game, Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, so the influence and impact that it had cannot be understated, at least amongst like the actual Sonic fan base. So what are we doing with the 6th generation of consoles? My personal bias and nostalgia says put this in the S tier unequivocally. There's no doubt it goes anywhere else, but hear me out. Adventure 1 and Adventure 2 are definitely bangers, but there's some people out there that are like, hey, listen, the mech stages aren't that good, the treasure hunting's not that good. The GameCube port that released for Sonic Adventure only got a 57 on Metacritic. Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, the port that released for the GameCube, not the Dreamcast version, got a 73. Sonic Heroes, a game that I personally like, has a lot of people that despise this game. Like, this game is so weird in the sense that you either love this game or you hate it, and there are some people that think this is like one of the worst Sonic games ever. It's kind of crazy. Regardless, like an extremely divisive game. Sonic Riders, like, yeah, we as the fans love this game, but the general reception maybe wasn't as strong. Sonic Mega Collection and Gems Collection, they're just ports. Shadow the Hedgehog was widely seen as a bad game. So if I remove my biases and feelings from the 6th generation of consoles, I think with that public perception of some of the games, I'm gonna bump it down to the A tier. I'm not going any lower though. In my opinion, this is probably the greatest generation of consoles. It includes the Xbox 360, the Nintendo Wii, as well as the PlayStation 3. This was the era of mass adoption for online multiplayer gaming, particularly in consoles. It existed prior, but by the Xbox 360 era, it was truly here. While Sony and Microsoft were competing and trying to create the next high graphical fidelity machine, Nintendo took a step back and went with more of a gimmick for their console with the Nintendo Wii featuring the motion controls. This thing was certainly not a next-gen console. So how did Sonic fare during this generation of consoles? Well, it was probably the most consequential one yet. The Sonic franchise was looking to take the leap into the next generation of consoles with Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. There's not really much that needs to be said about Sonic 06 other than the fact that it nearly killed the franchise. It was an utter disaster because a lot of people consider this to be the worst video game ever made. Definitely could have fooled me though, because I didn't find out that this game was bad until years later. Growing up, I thought this game was actually awesome. In my eyes, this game will always be the true Sonic Adventure 3 in the way that it tells its story. Had the multiple playable characters with the linear stages, the intertwining narrative, and the level design in general is probably the closest thing that we've gotten to Sonic Adventure 1 since. But make no mistake, in terms of the quality, this is a very poor product. The game was kind of doomed from the start because Sonic Team was split into two. One half was working on Secret Rings, the other half was working on Sonic 06, and they rushed this game to meet a holiday 2006 deadline by Microsoft. It's crazy because perhaps if you gave this game like an extra year, it probably could have been the greatest Sonic game ever. The game itself was plagued with really unpolished gameplay. There was a ton of game-breaking bugs. Although the bugs, to be honest, like I spent a lot of time just finding them because I thought it was really fun. The physics and movement of the game were certainly a downgrade from previous Sonic games such as Sonic Adventure 1. There was the awful romance element of the game that a lot of people didn't like either and found it to be weird. A lot of the mock speed section stages were barely functional and extremely frustrating for a lot of players. The new playable character Silver was extremely slow and boring, at least in my opinion. You would get absolutely barraged with loading screens that took forever. I certainly appreciate everything that this game tried to do, but you can't lie, as a product, it was certainly an unfinished game. The legacy of this game is pretty wild because 20 years later, you'll still see articles from game journalists using this game as an example to on the Sonic franchise. It's rated amongst critics one of the worst 3D Sonic games ever, so there's no denying that this game did some damage to the franchise. So how did Sonic Team bounce back from Sonic 06? Well, a couple of months later, they released Sonic and the Secret Rings, the other game that kind of contributed to this game's failure. Sonic and the Secret Rings didn't necessarily fare much better than Sonic 06, although it is considered to be better. The main gameplay gimmick of this game is featuring the Wii's motion motion controls. The game's an autorunner, so you don't really have full control over Sonic, you kind of just like guide his movement. The janky motion controls were definitely enough to frustrate a lot of players who played it. And while it's not necessarily a horrible game, like it's certainly a playable experience, I wouldn't say necessarily this was the direction that Sonic needed at the time. Let's skip ahead a bit real quick to also talk about the other storybook game, which was Sonic and the Black Knight. It's a very similar situation to how Secret Rings played out. Everything about this game is perfect. The vibes, the atmosphere, the story, the voice acting, but the only thing that isn't is the actual gameplay. By far, this game is Jason Griffith's best performance as Sonic the Hedgehog, and a lot of the things that I love about Sonic were gone from the character after this game flopped. It's kind of a shame because literally it's peak voice acting and writing. It's another one of those situations where the Metacritic score really wasn't that great, a 54, but the user score was a 7.4. All right, so first we skipped ahead, now we gotta go back to one of the most unique games in the entire Sonic series, and that is Sonic Unleashed. So how did Sonic Team bounce back from the near franchise-killing disaster of Sonic 06? Well, they released this game. In terms of quality and presentation, Sonic Unleashed is definitely like the most AAA feeling Sonic game probably ever. It features an extremely simple but charming story, kind of the best example of how video game stories don't necessarily need to be the most serious or dark to be good. If you have good presentation, good voice acting, good characterization, a plot that invokes emotion, a globe-trotting journey across a visually stunning world, and an incredible climax, probably the best the series has ever seen, and you got something good on your hands. As far as the gameplay goes for Sonic Unleashed, it is the tale of two halves. The first half of the game adapts the boosting gameplay that was first seen in Sonic Rush. In terms of the correlation to Sonic's actual abilities put into gameplay, this is the most accurate it probably will ever be. You have this blazing fast speed with the boost mechanic, high-speed platforming that requires precision timing and reaction. You have 2D sections that are integrated into the 3D section in order to break up the pace and allow for even more platforming. And arguably, some fans say that after all these years, Sonic Unleashed is still the best that the boost formula has to offer. So why did this game get mediocre reception from the critics, but an 8.6 from fans? This isn't necessarily rocket science or breaking news, but obviously it's the Werehog. There are people that absolutely love the Werehog, and there's sections when even I think the Werehog's pretty fun, even though I'm not like the biggest fan of this gameplay style. I mean, if you think about it, the combat is definitely polished and it works. Some of the platforming sections can be fun, some of the combat can even be fun, but I think the biggest problem with the Werehog is just simply that it's radically different than the boosting gameplay. So it's like, if you like one, but you don't like the other, you're going to hate the game, or probably rate it a 6 out of 10. The Werehog can be pretty slow, and you get kind of like soft locked in these sections where you have to spam and button mash the combos. There are people out there that say, oh no, you just got to get good, you just got to master the combos, which is probably true. Like, if you actually master the gameplay style, that is certainly going to be the way that it reaches its full potential. Combine that with the fact that some of these Werehog levels can drag on for like 30 minutes. You have to search every nook and cranny of every stage for the Sun and Moon medals in order to progress. Some people will find out the hard way and get soft locked. It's just way too different from the day stages that feel more in line with what I'm looking for from a Sonic the Hedgehog game. I'm just simply not the biggest Werehog fan. It's too slow for me. And despite having the highest highs in the series by far, in my opinion,
I can certainly see why initially when this game came out, it was written off by critics and got mediocre reception. Also, on the other side of the coin, I can see why some fans over the years have come out and said like, wait, this actually is kind of like an underrated gem. The game is just a tale of two halves. What else can I say about it? I have a lot of love for it in my heart, but at the same time, I understand where people are coming from. Now, you might be asking yourself, where are the bangers from this era? Well, I'm here to present to you Sonic and Mario at the Olympic Games. So the two biggest rivals from the 90s, Sonic and Mario, have finally linked up to put their differences aside. Sega and Nintendo in a collab game. And what did they do? Well, they made a party minigame collection. This game came out for the Wii, and it's basically a glorified Wii Sports with Mario and Sonic characters. While you can definitely have some fun in this game, you know, you play with your friends or something like that, there's not really too much depth to it. And unfortunately, all the potential that these two series could have had if you put them together for like a mainline platform or something, this is all that we got. And unfortunately, it's not really moving the needle forward. They also dropped another Sonic Riders game, which was Sonic Riders Zero Gravity for the Wii and PlayStation 2. In a lot of ways, it's pretty much similar to the first one. They had this additional mechanic for the Zero Gravity, and they actually replaced a couple of mechanics from the original. Definitely has a lot of heart and soul, as the art style from the game is pretty cool, and it also features like a full-blown story with cutscenes and voice acting. If you like Riders 1, you'll probably like this game as well, although in my opinion, I think the original Riders is definitely a little bit better than this one. It's one of those situations, again, where the fan base, you know, they adore Sonic Riders, but the critic reviews were also really not that good for this game. All right, I get it. So you're asking me about the bangers for this era. Well, can I present to you Sonic the Hedgehog 4, Episode 1? So yeah, Sonic 4 Episode 1, it's a much maligned game in the series. And this game, technically, in terms of narrative and title, is a direct continuation or a direct sequel to the classic Sonic the Hedgehog games. Except for the fact that it's like
not at all. Everything about this game is just weird. I mean, it's a 2D modern Sonic game, which you would think a lot of Sonic fans would love, but the physics of this game are not comparable to the actual classic games. The jump controls can feel a little bit clunky at times. The homing attack has been added, but that also just feels a little weird to use as well. Oh yeah, the special stages are back, but these are just reused from the original Sonic the Hedgehog game. And yeah, most people don't really like this game. I mean, I don't think it's the worst game, but it's just, like I said before, it's just an odd game. Sonic 4 Episode 1 was technically a mobile game, so I feel like for the time it was kind of impressive. But as a standalone console release, it really does not hold a candle to the original games it was trying to emulate. The review scores for this game were considered to be above average. It was like a 7 out of 10. Although Sonic fans do not like this game and gave it a 5.5 out of 10. So definitely a mixed bag. We also can't forget Sonic Free Riders. The last in the Rider series was released during this era. The primary gimmick of Sonic Free Riders, and probably the reason for its existence, was to showcase Xbox's new technology from the Xbox Kinect. So instead of using a controller, you actually had to use your body to control the character. And this was certainly a step down from other installments in the franchise. First and foremost, we got rid of the actual cutscenes and replaced it with these PNGs. As a result of using these mechanics, the level design in the game was obviously scaled down, and the game is generally considered to be one of the worst Sonic the Hedgehog games of all time, and the reason why we don't get Sonic Riders games anymore. The Metacritic score was a whopping 47 with a generally unfavorable 2.6 user scores, so yeah, not good. Another Sonic racing series was birthed, and that was Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. It's essentially your platformer, mascot, kart racer game, or whatever you want to call it. The gameplay of the game is pretty solid. While many people will be nostalgic for the series, and some people have a lot of fond memories of it, I don't think this is necessarily pushing the brand forward with any genre-defining mechanics or anything like that. Definitely a solid title, though. All right, the bangers. Let me introduce you to Sonic Colors. Finally, after all these years, Sonic Colors was the game that was considered to be a return to form for the franchise. The daytime stages from Sonic Unleashed that everyone liked, what if instead of adding the Werehog to the game, we added this gameplay style which people liked? Okay, there's like a lot of 2D in this game. Maybe it's not one-to-one with Unleashed, but granted, this game was released on the Wii, so some technical limitations were certainly there. But for a Nintendo Wii game in 2010, I can certainly say that this game looks pretty incredible, especially when you consider the fact that just a couple of years ago, Sonic Unleashed Wii really was like a very barren game in terms of like the background and set pieces. Now granted, Sonic Colors was developed exclusively for the Wii, whereas Sonic Unleashed Wii was also developed for the PS2, so you can see that. But I think the visuals of this game definitely hold up to this day, and probably will continue to with the great art style. But this game really brings you back to the basics. It's one consistent gameplay style throughout, so there's no like gimmicks or anything weird. Okay, technically there are gimmicks because the whiffs are featured in the game, but they don't divert from the main gameplay style. They're simply there to enhance the platforming experience. There's no motion controls, there's no sword, there's no slow button mashy beat 'em up combat Werehog sections, there's no treasure hunting stages, no mech shooters, it's just Sonic. Point A to point B, high-speed platforming in a short and sweet but simple adventure. As a result, we get the first generally favorable 3D Sonic game release, I think, since Sonic Adventure 2 on the Dreamcast, with an 8 out of 10 user score, basically an 8 out of 10 critic score. This was certainly revolutionary for the franchise at the time. With that being said, though, Sonic Colors is certainly not a perfect game. There's some gripes that a lot of people have with it, some gripes that I have with the game. I'm not going to do a full-blown review of the game, but there's certainly one thing that I think it's important to mention. One of the biggest downgrades from this game is that they stripped, like, the story away from Sonic. Like, this game's story is extremely simple. The writing is very bad. It started a trend for future Sonic games that would eventually kind of lead us into the era that we are in now. More on that later. But overall, it's hard to recognize this game as anything other than a massive success when this era was just littered with, like, bad games. Sega then follows up Sonic Colors by going back to back by dropping an undisputed banger of a game, Sonic Generations. Some people would argue that consecutively, these are the two greatest 3D Sonic games to be released back to back since the adventure games. And honestly, some people don't even like the adventure games, so it certainly comes down to personal preference, but most people can agree that Sonic Generations is probably one of the most polished 3D Sonic experiences ever. The lessons learned from Sonic Unleashed that were applied into Sonic Colors have now been fully fleshed out in a system that can actually handle a full game like this. Generations is a celebration of Sonic's past. It was released for Sonic's 20th anniversary, and it features a collection of Sonic's greatest hits reimagined in 3D. Or 2D, honestly. This game has a lot of 2D also. The game also introduced a split between classic Sonic and modern Sonic, giving them two separate designations. Classic Sonic's gameplay is pretty good as well. It's not a recreation of the Genesis games, but it's a really fun experience in its own right. Oh, I'm dead serious. I know people like to hate on this little pipsqueaks gameplay, but if you use that OP spin dash and actually get it right, memorize the level design, take some of those alternative paths by finding the red star rings, you'll start to have a blast because this gameplay style will really open up for you. Modern Sonic stages return the boost formula and give us some of the best level design that we've ever seen. Tons of spectacle, high-speed sections, multiple branching paths that encourage speed speedrunning and replaying the levels to improve your time. It's simply a great Sonic game, and while there's two separate gameplay styles, which will always create some division amongst critics, ultimately both gameplay styles are both in line with the core fundamentals of the series. Get to point A to point B as fast as possible while platforming. The game once again suffers from the trend of Sonic Colors by not really having a great story. A genuinely lackluster finish, like this is the first game to make a Super Sonic boss fight just like not even that cool or suspenseful. But it gives the people what they want and what they really needed at the time when the series was faltering, and that is just good gameplay. Also, during this era, we got Sega All-Stars Racing Transformed, which is widely considered to be a huge upgrade over its predecessor. Now, remember how I said the first All-Stars Racing wasn't really that unique, doesn't really bring anything to the table? I think this version of Sonic Racing does a lot more cool things. Now we're racing by land, air, sea. And Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed is widely considered to be the best Sonic racing game to date. A lot more replayability, tons of great tracks, great characters, and overall a very solid experience. It's a kart racer though, so it's not going to carry the generation, but it was certainly a solid title nonetheless. And most importantly, an improvement. There was also two more Sonic and Mario Olympic games released during this console era, but once again, you played one, you've kind of played them all. It's just like a party minigame collection. I wish Sega and Nintendo would get together and collab on an actual video game. Oh yeah, we got a Sega tennis game, but does this even count as a Sonic game? I don't know. Oh yeah, we also got Sonic 4 Episode 2 during this era, which was a continuation of Sonic 4 Episode 1, obviously, and this game introduces Tails, and there's like a team-up mechanic. The game's visuals are significantly improved from Episode 1. The physics seem a little slightly better. And while yes, I think this game is an improvement over the first game, unfortunately, it still doesn't really feel that good to play, and that is the biggest crime of any platformer. If the game doesn't control well, I'm not messing with it. While the partner mechanic for the game is fun in principle, like the actual movement of the gameplay is fun, the problem is like this little buffer in between using it. Every time you press the button to team up, there's like this 2 or 3 second delay, so it really gets in the way when you have to use it a bunch of times throughout the game, and certainly breaks up the pace. One thing you don't want to do in a classic Sonic game is break the pace. The physics of the game are still weird. He doesn't really carry momentum the way he does in the classics. The homing attack also has like a weird delay to it as well, so that's also kind of pace breaky. Overall, the game is just simply not as smooth as the classics that it's trying to emulate, just like Sonic 4 Episode 1. The bosses in this game also kind of suffer from Sonic Superstar Syndrome, which we'll get into a little bit later in the video, but to make a long point short, some of these bosses take longer than some of the levels that you're playing in. And speaking of the levels, the level design can feel a little clunky at times. It feels like it can be kind of hard to maintain a flow and pace in this game, so that is certainly something that's working against it. But at the end of the day, it's not a horrible game. It's probably like a 6 out of 10, 6.5. It's kind of weird. Sonic 4 Episode 1 is considered by the Sonic community to be the worst of the two, but the reviews for Sonic 4 Episode 2 are worse than Sonic 4 Episode 1. There was actually a Sonic 4 Episode 3 plan that was going to feature Knuckles and the Master Emerald, and presumably getting tricked by Dr. Eggman, but this never materialized, probably because the game was a flop. Overall, a net negative for the franchise at the time. So after that long history lesson, we are here to talk about the 7th generation of consoles. Some people, with just Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Colors, and Sonic Generations, that's enough to throw this thing into the S tier. But in my opinion, there's a lot of bad games in this era. There's also like, I think Sonic was on the brink of like destruction with games like Sonic 06. The storybook games weren't really that well liked when they came out. Sonic 4 Episode 1, even Unleashed. Like Unleashed was a banger, but people at the time didn't really like the game. So I think with some of the ups as well as the downs with this generation, like there really was some catastrophes. I'm gonna go ahead and throw it into the B tier. It really started to pick up towards the end with Colors and Generations. And that brings us to the 8th generation, which would include the Wii U, the Xbox One, and the PlayStation 4. The Wii U was a colossal, giant failure. And speaking of the Wii U, Sega linked up with Nintendo to give us 2 exclusive Sonic games for the console. The first of the 2 games released for the Wii U was Super Mario Galaxy at Home, and that is Sonic Lost World. Sonic Lost World is kind of a weird game. It's one of those games when you look at it, you want to like it. It's kind of bringing back that classic Sonic art style. If you're someone that didn't like werewolves or storybooks or human princesses, seeing this aesthetic might entice you to actually pick up this game. That's, of course, if you actually bought a Wii U. Of course, nobody bought the Wii U as it was discontinued literally 3 years after its release. Probably the quickest out of any console. Okay, I said probably. So the thing about this game is up until this point, the boost formula was working really well for the Sonic franchise. Sonic Unleashed, maybe it wasn't received well, but almost everyone liked the daytime stages. Colors was good, Generations was good. But in this game, they ditched the boost formula and went with this, like, I don't even know what to call it. I wouldn't wouldn't call it adventure style. It's kind of its own thing. Instead of a boost button, there's now a run button, which you have to hold in order to make Sonic go faster. The coolest thing that the game introduced was the parkour mechanic, and it's kind of sad that because the game flopped, they didn't expand upon this or polish it or like kind of flesh it out a little more. But to me, the movement's kind of the weakest part of the game. It doesn't move like a traditional Sonic game. It does some cool things, and there's definitely some cool tricks you can pull off, but overall, it doesn't really feel great to control. Like, I feel like the air controls in this game can cause for a lot of death and frustration. Some of the gimmicks of the game are certainly breaking up the pace. The homing attack in this game is easily the worst version of it ever. I mean, look at what happened right here, how it just like sent me back in the level. Sonic the Hedgehog game should feel good to play, and a majority of the time, at least my opinion, I don't think this game feels that great. To be honest, it doesn't even feel like a Sonic game. You don't like naturally gain speed or anything like that. A lot of the gimmicks can be extremely frustrating. I mean, it's certainly a platformer. Like, there's a lot of platforming in this game, but that doesn't make it good. And remember how I talked about the disturbing trend that Sonic Colors brought into the series? What happens when the stories and writing is really bad, but also people view the game as bad? That's when people's patience starts to wear thin with these lighter stories. Some people probably didn't like them to begin with, but this really made it worse. A platformer with imprecise controls is usually a recipe for disaster, and the critics didn't really like this game. They gave it a 6 out of 10. So this generation of Sonic games is certainly not off to a great start, but it couldn't get any worse, right? Well, let me introduce Sonic Boom. You know, Sega was really on the cusp. They had something great going with the boost formula. It was getting better and better with each game. And then they dropped Sonic Lost World. People were definitely upset. And then they dropped this game, and that was it. Sonic Boom was the start of a spin-off franchise. One of the things that they did with Sonic Boom, which was taking one of the best character designs in all of video games and completely butchering it. And the goal of this was to rebrand Sonic to appeal to more Western audiences and bring in a golden age of licensing revenue. They also dropped a full-blown TV show as well, which, to be fair, was actually pretty good. Granted, it basically has next to nothing to do with the Sonic the Hedgehog that you know and love, but as its own standalone thing, it's okay. Without getting too deep into it, this is widely considered to be one of the worst Sonic games ever. Some people argue that the game was rushed and there's a lot of missed potential with it, but at its core, the gameplay of this game is very different than what people expect from the franchise, and it's a very big departure from the things that made the series great. The game's review score was a 32, and it got a user score of 3.7, so yes, it actually might be the worst ranked Sonic game ever. So while Sonic Generations and Sonic Colors were two games that were received extremely well, which made people think that the franchise might be back, Sonic Lost World and Sonic Boom brought this franchise to a new dark age. It's been a couple of years since we got the disaster of Sonic Boom, and now we are moving into Sonic Mania, which was released in 2017. While Sonic Mania wasn't really developed by Sonic Team, it showed that the series' roots were still something that wasn't worth throwing away. Sonic Mania brought the beloved Genesis formula back into the franchise, and it did not show any signs of age. As a matter of fact, some people consider this to be the best Sonic game ever. Sonic Mania, to this day, is still one of the highest rated Sonic games. You can certainly criticize some things about it, like there's a lot of reused level design and level themes. There's also a lot of reliance on nostalgia, like it's not a fully 100% original game, but you can't really argue with the quality of the game. But is it enough to save Sonic in this era? We haven't gotten a mainline Sonic game in a couple of years, so what did Sega announce next? Well, we got a game from the team that brought us Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations, and that is Sonic Forces. We ditched the blue arms. We brought in classic Sonic, although maybe this was a little ill-advised, but people like Generations, so yeah, we brought back classic Sonic. And they brought in an OC creator, so Sonic fans were definitely over the moon about this game when it was announced. Like, the cinematic trailers for it just looked absolutely insane. The problem with the game is that it didn't really turn out so good. So people had insane expectations. They waited 4 years for this game, and the final result was something that was extremely easy. This game you could beat in probably like 2 hours. The level design in this game was so simple. Half of the gameplay is just holding the boost button and just watching the game play itself. The controls of the game also weren't great. They were pretty clunky. Classic Sonic in this game plays nothing like the Genesis games, and he doesn't even control better than Sonic Generations. Like, we already did this, so how did it get worse? Couple that in with the fact that the levels are like 1 minute long, and this game was extremely disappointing. I don't think this is the worst Sonic game. As a matter of fact, I think there's definitely some fun that you can have with it. The problem is that we waited 4 years for this. They tried to make the stories a little better, but ultimately it was the same writing team that still didn't fundamentally understand the characters. The biggest crime of this game is that Sonic fans were hyped up for 4 years. It's been so long since we got a mainline Sonic game, and then their expectations are completely subverted. The end result was a 57 on Metacritic, and it's been a while since we got a good mainline 3D Sonic game, so people were hitting the panic button and writing off the franchise. And then a couple years later, we brought back Sonic Kart Racing with Team Sonic Racing, which had a story mode, but obviously was low budget, as you can tell by these PNG cutscenes. It had an interesting team-based mechanic, but overall didn't really do anything for the game. For the most part, the game just exists. There's really no reason to play this game over something far superior like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So while this era was considered considered widely to be a massive drought for the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, we did team up with Mario one more time to release Sonic and Mario at the 2020 Olympic Games for the Nintendo Switch. The first and only in the Switch era. While this series was nothing really more than just a fun party minigame collection that you could play with your friends and have a good time, none of the games in this series were necessarily met with like extremely over-the-moon praise. But I do think there's a lot of people that are going to miss this series and probably have some fond memories playing it growing up. In a way, this feels kind of bittersweet, and the series may not be coming back because the Olympics ditched the Mario and Sonic series to explore NFTs and esports, allegedly. The final game in the Mario and Sonic series did get mixed reception, but actually it's probably one of the higher received games during the 8th generation. But anyways, not really doing much for this era. So what are we doing with the 8th generation? The 8th generation also includes the Switch, by the way. It's kind of weird, but I mean, I guess with Sonic Mania, you could throw it in the C tier, but I'm super biased. I hate Sonic Lost World. Sonic Boom, I dislike. Sonic Forces, not good enough. So I'm honestly throwing this generation in the D tier. A lot of damage was done to Sonic in this time. It wasn't just the 06 Dark Era. This little time period has something to do with it as well. So now we move on to the 9th generation of consoles, and probably the most consequential one yet. Some people are saying that the death of consoles is imminent. As of today, the only 9th generation consoles that are currently on the market are the PlayStation 5 as well as the Xbox Series S and X. So technically the 9th generation of consoles begins on November 2020. So for the sake of argument, any game released after November 2020, we're going to put in the 9th generation era. We are in a brand new era of Sonic because the first Sonic the Hedgehog movie was released in 2020. And it changed the direction of the franchise forever. Somehow, seemingly on accident, the movie wildly exceeded expectations, so now the games needed to follow suit. Which brings us to the first game of the 9th generation era, which is Sonic Colors Ultimate, and technically it's an 8th generation game because it's developed for 8th generation hardware, but besides the point, it technically started 1 year after the 9th generation started, so we're going to go ahead and classify this as a 9th generation game. Now this game, by definition, was really not a good port. It added some cool things to Sonic Colors Ultimate, like it actually added some new modes to the game. There's one where you can actually race against Metal Sonic, which is pretty cool. Sonic now has customization. You can pick different auras, you can pick different gloves, you can pick different shoes. I think this is objectively a good thing for Sonic games. And at the end of the day, it still is Sonic Colors, which is a beloved game, so you have to give it that. But yeah, now to talk about the bad. There was a ton of bugs in this game when it released. There's like 30-minute compilations of things going wrong with this game pre-release. The visuals of the game don't necessarily look enhanced. They kind of have this washed out look with a lot of bloom. Tons of performance issues such as stuttering with the game. I personally experienced a lot of that with the PC version. Also, the game would crash a lot. So in addition to just like not being polished, not looking as good, having glitches, and probably the most egregious issue is the performance issues, it was widely considered to be a horrible port of the game. And quite frankly, it's pretty embarrassing that they weren't able to port over a Wii game properly to modern hardware. So the critic score of Sonic Colors Ultimate was lower than the original game, and the user score was also lower as well. So this generation still really isn't off to a good start, and it's been over a decade since we got a positively received 3D Sonic game. The next one needed to be big. All we had was 4chan leaks and this little teaser right here to hold us over for basically like a year. IGN finally showed an exclusive first look at the gameplay for Sonic Frontiers, and it was an absolute disaster. Everyone on the internet was roasting this. Sonic fans were hitting the panic button. Everyone was calling for the game to be delayed. It wasn't a good time to be a fan. And then subsequently, over the next couple of months, we got better and better footage, and people's nerves were calmed a little bit. But ultimately, the only thing that was going to matter was day one of the release and people's actual direct hands-on experience with a full playthrough of the game. When the game actually released, people were really liking Frontiers. It was bringing something new to the table. It wasn't perfect, right? Because the game obviously had a lower budget, a little bit of a lack of polish here and there, but for the most part, it had a really good gameplay loop. There was something very solid with the open zone. Platform around the island, collecting memory tokens in order to free your friends, defeat bosses and enemies around the map, in order to go into cyberspace, which is traditional Sonic gameplay and levels, kind of similar to Breath of the Wild. I mean, let's be real. It's pretty much Sonic Breath of the Wild, which would grant you a Chaos Emerald. You rinse and repeat till you get 7, you go Super Sonic, you fight the boss, and then you move on to the next island. To be honest, I love this game, and it actually is one of my favorite 3D Sonic games of all time. I think what I love the most about this game, and really any platformer game in general, like this is how you win me over, I just think the controls are so good. I feel like it's buttery smooth in the open zone. It's why Sonic Adventure 1 is also one of my favorite games. If the character feels good to play, like I'm gonna love it. This game kind of put Sonic Team back on the map. For the first time in a decade, people were starting to trust them again. And not too long after the game released, they even announced free DLC content for us to sink our teeth into, one of which included an alternative campaign, and overall, all 3 updates added a ton of content and exceeded my expectations. Like the final boss, after building up all the hype moments and aura with the supersonic boss fights being this purple rock, like it was quite frankly just embarrassing. So getting a proper conclusion to one of my biggest gripes with the game was certainly satisfying. Plus, the spin dash was one of the most fun abilities that they ever added to the game, in addition to the momentum slider. So Sonic Frontiers, in my opinion, is a great game. Certainly has some issues, and we won't go into all of them. We haven't gotten sales figures in a while, but as of 2023, it sold 3.5 million units, and Sega deemed it as a massive success. Whether you love the game or hate the game, Sonic Frontiers will always be remembered as the game that saved the franchise as far as the mainline platformer games go. Just a couple of months before Frontiers release, we also got Sonic Origins. Sonic Origins was marketed as the definitive way to play the classic Sonic games. All 4 games were remade in the retro engine, and we now have widescreen support and HD gameplay. Now, were these perfect ports? Well, not necessarily. Are they serviceable? Absolutely. There are tons of videos that will go into why Sonic Origins is not necessarily the absolute definitive way to play these games, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the average consumer who will play this game will probably enjoy it and not notice some of the things that were absent. I think honestly, just having an official way to play Sonic 3 and Knuckles on something like the Nintendo Switch for the first time ever could definitely be seen as a victory, but there's certainly some things that Sega could have done better with this port. Oh yeah, Sega also milked the fans when they released Sonic Origins Plus, which didn't really add much to the game other than a couple of Game Gear ROMs, and they added Amy Rose as a playable character. So for $10, you could upgrade your game, or for $40, the original price of the game. If you didn't buy the original, you just get Origins Plus. So if you bought Origins, you got scammed. I mean, ultimately, the most reviewed version of the game is in the green on Metacritic. It's only a 7.5 out of 10 for fan score, so you know, it is what it is, right? It's not like a major loss, but not like a major victory, I guess. What really came out of left field was Sonic Superstars. So that was the next game to be released. And this game was announced not too long after Frontiers release, only like 6 months. So nobody was expecting this. Sonic Superstars was billed to be the answer to the new Super Mario Bros. Series. We now have 4-player co-op on-screen multiplayer for the first time ever in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. New Chaos Emerald powers. Fang the Hunter has finally returned to the series. We also got a new playable character. Sonic Superstars was certainly pacing to be one of the best Sonic games ever, except for the fact that it has these self-inflicted wounds and didn't quite get the review score that we wanted. So on the outset, the updated 3D visuals I think look pretty good. Like the environments are vibrant. The game is an art style that's full of color and life. I'll never understand the constant criticism I see of the visuals of this game on Twitter. I think they look fine. You have, for the most part, some really strong level design. Now, every classic Sonic game has a couple of levels that like you don't care for, and this game is certainly no exception. Golden Capital, Egg Fortress, but a lot of the time I feel like the level design is rock solid. The controls are buttery smooth and crispy. Like I said before, a platformer game, in order to win me over, has to have really solid controls. I could almost overlook tons of flaws if the movement in the game is fine, and this pretty much replicates the classic feel. So where did this game go wrong? Like, they had the recipes to get a 9 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10 on Metacritic. What happened? This happened. As a matter of fact, some of the boss battles in the game take significantly longer than the actual level that you're playing through. Typically in a classic Sonic game, I like to kind of just like cheese the bosses with iframes and just move on to the next level. This game doesn't really allow for that because they have these little soft lock phases. Fight the boss for 5 minutes and die? Okay, yeah, you gotta do it again. Do it 15 times over and you're gonna be frustrated with the game. The multiplayer feature that was a major selling point of the game, oh yeah, you can only do it in local co-op, so you can't play with your friends online, which I feel like should just be the bare minimum in 2024. Actually, this game released in 2023. Some people criticize the multiplayer in this game, saying it's a little too chaotic, it doesn't really work. I mean, honestly, I'm not gonna go that far because it's a Sonic the Hedgehog game. I don't really know how you're gonna keep 2 players on the screen going as fast as possible and make it 100% perfect. I feel like they kind of did the best that they could. And during my multiplayer playthrough of the game, I had a good time. Like, it's chaos, it's fun, that's what it's supposed to be. The Emerald powers, some of them are fun, some of them are not so useful, but I don't think they necessarily detract from the fun of the game. The new character, Trip, she's probably the most fun character to play with in the entire game. She has a great moveset, but her level design in her campaign is like the hard mode, so it's just like turned up to like 5 different degrees of difficulty. And there's a lot of cheap little tricks that they throw at you to throw off your pace, and it just like really breaks the fun of the experience. The actual online multiplayer that they added in the game, it's fun, but it's so lackluster and bare bones that it's not even worth talking about. I don't even know why they put it in the game. They should have invested any money and resources into allowing us to play co-op online. But ultimately, the game shines in its single-player time attack experience, if you will, and that's usually what I do when I play Sonic games. I replay the levels that I like, so I do like Superstars. But there's just so many self-inflicted wounds that could have been avoided disappointed with this game. It has so much potential and all the tools to just be one of the best Sonic games ever, and it just wasn't. But overall, like I said before, I think the game is pretty fun. It's miles better than anything we were getting over the last decade. It's significantly better than Sonic the Hedgehog 4, Episode 1 and 2, probably combined, if I'm being honest. So I would have liked just a little more, but overall, I'm chalking this up as a good game for this era. And now we move on to the final game. I can't believe that we've been doing this for an hour. I mean, I was expecting this video to be like 15 minutes, but here we are. So we have Shadow Generations. It seemed like Sega was gearing up for a Sonic Generations remaster according to the announced trailer. It didn't seem like anything was too out of the sort until the CGI cutscene played and Shadow appeared out of nowhere. Although technically we kind of knew this was going to happen due to some leaks that came out prior, but we got a look at brand new gameplay featuring Shadow the Hedgehog exclusively. Also, the big bad villain from the original Shadow the Hedgehog game, Black Doom, was back, so fans were hyped. But also people were a little bit skeptical. Is this going to be another Sonic Frontiers cyberspace situation, or would they improve the physics? At the same time though, they seem pretty confident in this game. They were showing off a lot of gameplay, a lot of cool hype moments like Mephiles returning to the game. We also saw that the game was going to feature an open zone, so maybe we were getting more than we bargained for, because at the time the discussion surrounding this game is like, is it a level pack, is it a full separate game? And for the most part, in terms of the amount of content you get, it's basically a full experience. We got the Doom power showed off. Like, Shadow Generations was looking pretty hype. The game came out, and guess what happened? For the first time in a very long time, we got a 3D Sonic game finally in the green on Metacritic. 8 out of 10 with a 9 out of 10 user score, universally liked. Shadow Generations is just simply a very good Sonic game. It's extremely polished, the animations are great, the level design and controls are extremely fun. The story was pretty good, certainly better than anything that we got during the Meta era, although I wouldn't say it's like the best. A lot of the gimmicks and abilities that Shadow had, such as the Doom powers, were pretty fun to use. We got to mess around with Shadow's chaos control. The open zone had a lot of content. Like, the game is just straight up fun. It's good. There's not really much else to say about it. A lot of people are saying that Sonic and Shadow Generations as a total package is probably the best 3D Sonic experience that money can buy. Granted, the Sonic Generations remaster was largely untouched, and I guess maybe after experiencing Colors Ultimate, that's probably a good thing, I guess. Putting these two games together in one package was certainly a brilliant idea. So we basically get the highest received 3D Sonic game since Sonic Adventure 2 on the Dreamcast. So where are we putting the 9th generation of Sonic games, aka the Renaissance era? Well, we have two undisputed bangers, at least in my opinion: Sonic Frontiers and Shadow Generations. Sonic Frontiers, a little divisive. Sonic Superstars, a little divisive, but I like the game. And then Origins Plus, a little divisive, and Colors Ultimate definitely like drags us down a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it into the A tier. Now, we still have time, right? There's still time for another Sonic game to be released within the next 2 years. So there might be another mainline 9th generation Sonic game, which can easily bring it up to the S tier, but we still have time. Cross Worlds isn't out yet, you know what I'm saying? Maybe one more mainline game. So for now, we're putting it into the A tier, but it's teetering on that. It's right there. I mean, it might as well be at the top of the A tier. So let me know if you guys agree with these rankings for the console generations, and stay tuned for the handheld rankings.